keeping our institutions running at a professional level. We're just regular people. We're normal people who do an extremely difficult job every day. We put our lives on the line. We have to go into places that most people would run from.
Gary Mills, National Legislative Coordinator for the Council of Prison Locals. The AFGE-affiliated council is concerned about overcrowding in federal prisons and maintaining safe staffing levels for prison employees. That's why they are supporting a bill in Congress to give federal judges leeway over mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenders as a way of reducing overcrowding in the prisons.
It's a bill aimed at giving the judges more leeway on mandatory minimum sentence. It's a reduction for first-time nonviolent drug users. With this Smart Sentencing Act, it will give a judge discretion that if he feels that say it's a first-time nonviolent drug offender, has never been in trouble before, and his mandatory minimum currently is 5 years, he would be able to, rather than have to impose the 5-year, it would reduce it by 50%.
A new Demos report says Walmart could give its workers a raise by redirecting funds the giant retailer spends on buying back shares of Walmart stock. The report, a higher wage is possible, shows Walmart has spent $6.6 billion repurchasing company stock. If that money was spent instead on workers' pay, it would put an extra $5.13 an hour into workers' pockets. Demos senior policy analyst Amy Traub says that buying back its stock boosts earnings per share and consolidates ownership of the company, mostly benefiting a small group of people. A report this week from says outsourcing of public services often sets off downward spirals that the report says reduces worker wages and hurts economic stability for middle and working class communities. The report, Race to the Bottom, How Outsourcing Public Services Rewards Corporations and Punishes the Middle Class, says that the private sector often fails to uphold its promise to run public services better, faster, and cheaper than the government, sometimes with horrific results. And the report says that too often taxpayers are inadvertently contributing to growing income inequality. Outsourcing, the report finds, often hurts public services while eroding the middle class by turning middle-class jobs into poverty-level jobs. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here tonight on the program. Lots of things to get to, lots of things to talk about. Lots of stuff going on. Today, obviously the big day, the 70th anniversary of D-Day. You know, on these days, there's a part of me that wishes my grandfather would have spent a little bit of time talking about his experience during World War II. I often think that generation didn't talk about the horrific things they saw. My grandfather never participated in any of the pageantry, never participated in any of the pomp and circumstance. In fact, it was something he never talked about. In fact, I often think of the only thing I ever remember him saying about the military was that if I were to join, he would have killed me himself. And I think it comes back to what did he see, what did he experience, and part of me, I've talked about some of the things that I wish going back I would have known to ask, because you go back and you think about the things that they went through and what led to it and the history and the run-up, because what we hear now is a lot of, 70 years, there are only a handful of people. There are only a small number of people who were still alive who were there. There are a dwindling number of people who were alive during that period, the greatest generation. And, I think back to my experiences as a kid, when my mother worked in the nursing home, and the lessons I learned from those folks who at the time, this is the early 70s, and these people were probably in their late 60s, early 70s. So they had lived from, the beginning of the turn of the century forward. They were, probably the older World War II vets. And some of the stories that they told about growing up during World War I and all of those things were just things that stuck with me, but my grandfather never talked about it. And I wonder if it was just that was his way of dealing with it. If that what he saw was horrific, and you just wonder sometimes. And it's one of those things I regret now looking back that I did not have the opportunity to spend time discussing, because I look at what's going on right now, and I remember as a teenager, anytime anything anything that had to do with military movements or any discussion of the military, in his view, was something that just wasn't permitted on television. Punditry, commentary, nothing. You couldn't in public, in his view, talk about what was going on. And I look at what in this moment, this moment of history, looking at what's going on around this Bergdahl situation, thinking about all of the Benghazi stuff and all of the attempt to make the president to make him look horrible, and for purely political gain, not for any we're going to make things better position. I mean, I don't know that you can actually look at what they're doing with this Bergdahl situation and go, they're trying to make the situation so it never happens again. Nonsense. This is all about making the guy look bad and trying to, you saw it, I knew it was coming. I was miserable all day yesterday, but I was still following the news from my bed because I still feel horrible, but there was no getting up yesterday. Whatever it is that has gripped itself onto me is kicking my behind. But I still because I'm a junkie and I had to keep following the news. Alan West comes out, we need to impeach the president for bringing home a U.S. soldier a couple of days before the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And I had to stop and think, what would my grandfather say? If this Bergdahl is a deserter, if he is a traitor, you deal with him, but not on foreign soil. And that brings me to today being the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And the sacrifice, the enormous sacrifice, the courage it must have taken. And the statement that came out of Pennsylvania State Senator Scott Wagner, big Tea Party guy, and I guess I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that the Tony Soprano of Central Pennsylvania, Scott Wagner, is saying things inflammatory, especially a day before the 70th anniversary of D-Day, comparing workers and their unions to Hitler and to Putin. And those unions, they're just like those, because they want power and control. And I'm looking at basically a mob leader who has made his money off the government teat, sucking government contracts dry, pointing his finger, saying that those people want power and control. And, I look at this and I ask, have we fallen down the rabbit hole? What used to be hyper-patriotism is now just turning into obnoxious. This idea that you can compare workers to Nazis because they want to make a decent wage, that I wonder what my grandfather would have thought. Because my grandfather fought for the unions when he got back from fighting fascism during World War II. When he came back to the shop floor, he fought to have a voice. He fought to have a decent middle-class living. He fought to improve the lives of not just himself, but his children and this guy right here, his grandchildren. He understood thinking down the road, investing in the future. May have only had an 8th grade education, but understood that American patriotic dream of a better future for their children. The people who have gripped our media, the people who have gripped our message and are tearing our country apart from within, these idiots who run around with guns thumbed over their shoulder because I can, and these people who are gridlocking our government so nothing can be done, all in the name of their patriots, and an idiot like Scott Wagner can say that union that my grandfather fought for is akin to Hitler? If I was allowed to use the F-bomb, I would most certainly use it right here. Are you freaking kidding me? And I wonder what my grandfather would have done. My grandfather, much like I am, was a physical person. Someone got out of hand. He was a firm believer, and sometimes you need to smack somebody to make a citizen out of him. And even well into his 60s, he was not somebody that you wanted to tangle with. And maybe it's time for the greatest generation, or what's left of them, and maybe the next greatest generation who is going to have to fight the fights over again. Maybe it's time we start talking about taking the Scott Wagners outside and tanning their hide. Because this kind of a statement, really, honestly and truthfully, flat wrong and degrading to a generation of people who fought real fascism, who fought the Nazis, and degrading and diminishing the accomplishments of a generation who came back and fought for a decent living. And I don't know York County. I don't know how you voted in that guy. But I tell you, you better think about voting him out. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for The World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Heads of state and veterans from around the world gathered in France today to mark the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings. President Barack Obama spoke at a ceremony at the Normandy American Cemetery, the final resting place of some 9,387 soldiers.
Normandy, this was democracy's beachhead. And our victory in that war decided not just a century, but shaped the security and well-being of all posterity. We worked to turn old adversaries into new allies. We built new prosperity. We stood once more with the people of this continent through a long twilight struggle until finally a wall tumbled down and an iron curtain too. And from Western Europe to East, from South America to Southeast Asia, 70 years of democratic movements spread.
The president also used his remarks to praise the modern American military and the ways in which it's changed and stayed the same since 1944.
And as today's wars come to an end, this generation of servicemen and women will step out of uniform, and they too will build families and lives of their own. They too will become leaders in their communities, in commerce and industry and perhaps politics, the leaders we need for the beachheads of our time. And God willing, they too will grow old in the land they helped to keep free.
We'll have more world news for you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this fight, I'll take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war. It's one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. I got an email during the break. Janet says her husband is appalled, outraged, and angry beyond belief over the newly minted State Senator Scott Wagner's comments. And, well, a couple of very, very choice expletives that I can't repeat being terrestrial radio, but you can kind of put your mind there. And when someone compares workers' unions to Hitler, there's something, I think there's some disconnect between the ears. That's just my personal opinion. But someone who I don't think belongs in our state Senate. Again, just my opinion. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about this and also some really important stuff. I've asked Mike Crossy. He's the president of PSEA, the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Mike, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. Anytime at all, Rick. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
So what's your take on this? I mean, I look at this statement, it's repugnant. It's something that I think every worker, every person should be appalled at.
Yeah, this language, comparing union leaders, union workers to Hitler and to Putin, I mean, it's just totally unacceptable. We've never had an example of that in Pennsylvania politics before. It just drags the whole political system to a new low. Unfortunately, this is the kind of stuff and ideology that so often dictates what goes on in Washington, D.C. And we see that their favorability rating is about 13%, I think. And I think that's the problem. I mean, we can disagree with Democrats, we can disagree with Republicans, but we should always be respectful of each other, and we should talk about policy. We should never talk about personalities. This just makes no sense at all. I know I took a special offense at it, and I had some of my, my Jewish members today call and, talk to me about it, and they were really upset. I had, one friend who's a judge call and said how upset he was over this. And, it makes no sense to me. You never solve a problem with that kind of bullying. You solve problems in the state by talking to people. and you talk to people with respect. You never, ever go to that kind of low and try to bully people.
But I look at him, Mike, and I'll be honest, it doesn't surprise me. I saw the kind of campaign he ran. I see the kind of person that he portrays himself in the media as. I don't know him personally. I only know the persona that he puts forth as a candidate and now as a state senator. And I say this is definitely not the kind of guy I think should be sitting in a place where discussion and give and take and compromise is part of the job. He seems like an absolute ideologue, that he has his preconceived ideas, and hell be damned if anyone has an idea cross to his.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is no place in Pennsylvania politics. We can agree, we can disagree. I've got candidates on both sides of the aisle that I've disagreed with, and it really doesn't matter. But my gosh, I don't believe I've ever been disrespectful, to any of them. And I certainly disagree wholeheartedly with lots of them, but on both sides of the aisle. But at the same time, we've never ever stooped to that kind of low. I mean, we always talk about policy issues, and we talk about ideas, and let's talk about facts. And I think it's unfortunate. I certainly hope that the senators' own party members have a conversation with them and say, we don't work that way. And, and he's a new state senator, so I'm hoping that, that he recognizes that this is a one time. I appreciate you and your show highlighting this issue, because hopefully, we stop this kind of nasty politics right before it gets started.
Yeah, and maybe bring him in the line. I doubt you can turn him around, but at least show people who he is. And to me, the timing just seemed almost calculated to get the kind of news. I mean, the day before D-Day, the 70th anniversary of D-Day, I don't know how much more of a slap in the face you can throw out to get attention than that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm not sure the senator calculated that, but it's certainly, if it wasn't calculated, it had to be the worst timing that anybody could possibly do for that kind of comment. We lost, tens of thousands of men, women, of all faiths over there fighting the Nazi regime. And then to turn around and just compare working people, I mean, these are teachers, nurses, firefighters, policemen, to compare, working people and their leaders to Hitler or to Putin. It was beyond the realm of my possibility when somebody said that to me, that, that was what he said, and they transcribed it and handed it to me in writing and said, this is what the senator said. And I said, oh my gosh, it makes no sense to me. Like I said, I was totally shocked, and I hope the senator, never ever, you're right, we may never agree on the issue that he was espousing to. But at the same time, let's debate the merits of the legislation. Let's not start calling each other names, because you're never going to get people at the table that way.
I find it interesting, though, from sitting in this chair looking at him, a guy who made his money off of the government teat, pointing his finger at government, saying this is bad, and workers are. It just seems to me very hypocritical, and that's probably where I'll leave that.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. I don't know him. I've never met him. But I do understand that, his business, involves government contracts. And, so of course, I don't understand this whole Tea Party movement that the government is bad. Government shouldn't be doing everything, but government should do the things that people can't do. Government should pick up trash. Government should protect our streets.
Educate our children.
Firefighters, our police, right? Our teachers and educators in the school buildings. That's necessary work, and it's proud work. I taught school for 34 years. Both my other officers in PSEA were educators. We all taught special education children and worked with special education children, and to turn around and be accused of those kind of tactics and those kind of beliefs just makes no sense to me. I spent my entire career not only educating kids, but teaching kids how to be good citizens and how to collaborate with people and never ever to bully people. You know, you don't hurt those who are weaker. You don't bully people. You know, and that's what I thought this was an attempt to bully other legislators into voting the way he was advocating for them to vote.
No, and again, going back to his persona, from the beginning throughout the whole campaign, I said it was very much a bully campaign. So I think your analogy of him attempting to bully very on point. Let me ask you, this week, the House Education Committee voted 17-7 to move along this piece of legislation to basically fire teachers for economic reasons. In basically, getting rid of seniority, getting rid of any other thing other than, well, we just decide we're going to fire who we want. I'm curious your thoughts.
It is absolutely a horrendous piece of legislation. I mean, it's one of those ones where, I taught school for 34 years, and I may not have been as enthusiastic as my daughter, who, had been teaching when I became a PSA officer for 5 years, but I was still, I believe, just as good. I believe experience counts. I believe experience is important. For them to say they're going to do away with seniority, all they're doing is figuring out another way to lessen the quality in the classroom. I mean, as a 34-year teacher, I still thought that I could see kids, I could see in their eyes whether they got what I was teaching or not. I mean, I thought I was still a really, really good teacher. And, I think that experience counts. I said to one legislator one day when he said to me, I want the young, enthusiastic teacher. And I said, well, let me give you a different scenario. I said, if you or I have a heart attack and they wheel us into the emergency room and they're going to do heart surgery on me, I said, I got to be honest with you. I don't want the youngest kid on the block just because he's got a lot of enthusiasm. I said, I want the doctor who's got some experience and knows what he's doing, and he's seen everything that can happen in that surgery. And I want his experience sitting at the top of the table taking care of me.
I'm with you.
I said, to me, seniority counts. I said, you look at an airplane pilot, and they get into some rough weather. Look at the guy who landed the plane in the Hudson that day. He was an experienced pilot. He didn't panic. I've seen a lot of good young educators, and they impress the daylights out of me. But to say we're going to just start laying people off because they're higher on the salary scale or they've been around for a while, that makes no sense at all to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the other part of it is you could take that to the next step. I want the guy who might recognize that it's not a heart attack and not split me open because he's enthusiastic.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I look at this I look at this legislation, and to me it just seems that I know where this goes. This goes to the highest paid teachers are just going to get cut off immediately because we got budget constraints. So we're going to hire a bunch of maybe first or second year Teach for America type teachers for the lowest cost just because we're making our budget. And what happens to my kids? What happens to the future?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we ought to be talking about quality. We should be making sure that every school, every classroom has a qualified quality teacher in that classroom. And, it shouldn't be about a financial decision. It should be about making sure that we got every classroom with a quality teacher in there, and we have an evaluation system to make sure that people are doing their job. You follow that evaluation system, but I can guarantee you every school district will misuse that if they're allowed to lay off people because they're higher on the seniority scale and higher on the salary scale.
Absolutely. And then you open yourself up to tons of age discrimination cases because, of course, the more senior teachers are going to have higher salaries and they're going to be kicked to the curb just because they're the more senior employees. And,
right.
And that seems wrong to me on such a level. But beyond the fact of having a good qualified teacher, in every classroom. We should have a qualified nurse, a qualified librarian, a qualified counselor. We should have all of the tools that a school needs to run. And I look at Philadelphia, where this year 2 kids have died because in schools where there was no nurse.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I have met our nurses in our schools. I could probably name off the top of my head 4 nurses who have saved a child's life. And the work they do is unbelievable. But you're right. We have classrooms all across the state now without librarians. We have students who are not getting the extra help they need right now because we've laid off paraprofessionals. We've laid off support people. We've laid off math coaches and English coaches. This governor has just absolutely decimated our public school system. We're a school district, we're a school system in Pennsylvania that we went for 10 years in a row. Every year they were tested, classroom test scores went up in every test given, in every grade given, until Governor Corbett cut the funding. And then at that point, test scores started going down again.
Well, Mike, money isn't everything. Just because he cut the funding doesn't mean that's the reason the test scores went down.
No, it's not the only reason, but it is a big reason.
No, I'm being facetious. I mean, when you take all the money out of the classroom, you take 20,000 people out of the classroom, what do you think is going to happen?
Yep. I've seen classrooms now with 40 kids in the classroom.
Jeez.
I mean, that is absolutely absurd. And they have no extra help. Summer schools are gone in large districts all over the state. And the worst thing is that it's so. I'm up here right now at a Education and Civil Rights Conference, where I'm at right now. And and when I think about what this governor did, his funding cuts, and those that support this governor, his funding cuts in the wealthier school districts, the average cut was $113 per student. In the poorer school districts, school districts with most minority students, the average cut was over $500 per student.
Wow.
The kids who need the most help are getting the least help. And that is just absolutely wrong. The legislature and a governor, hopefully a new governor, have to create a fair, equitable funding formula that gives more adequate money to the schools. That'll reduce money in taxpayers' pockets, too. It's one of those ones where property taxes keep going up because the state keeps cutting back. We need to come up with a fair, equitable funding formula that equity and adequacy into the funding system so that it shouldn't make kids who live in one zip code get a really good education, and kids that live in another zip code that don't have the funding, they don't have the resources, they don't have safe schools. That shouldn't happen. And it's happening all over Pennsylvania because of this governor.
Yeah, so last question I've got for you. What do we do about it?
One, we start with electing a new governor. That's step one. And we elect people who are going to be pro-public education and pro-working family because, if we rebuild, I remember a really, really old story, and I know you're getting close on time here. A guy was, was trying to read the newspaper, and his kid was bothering him. And, so he took a page, and it was a page of the world. And he tore it up, and he said to his kid, go take this and see if you can put this puzzle together. Kid came back in like 5 minutes. And Dad looked at him and said, how'd you do that? And the kid said, oh, Dad, on the back of it was a picture of a man. He said, so I just put the man together, and the world came together. And I got to tell you, that's a good analogy for what we're doing here. If we take care of working families, if we take care of kids in schools, if we take care of their health and their retirement security, all of Pennsylvania will move forward together.
That's a fantastic story. Mike, I always appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. Bye-bye.
Mike Crossy, president of the Pennsylvania Education Association. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Red roses too, I see them blue for me and you, and I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
The dictionary defines a caterpillar as a, quote, worm-like larva and a crawler. Also, that pillar part of the word is derived from a French verb that means to pillage, abuse, mistreat. Now, meet Caterpillar Inc., the world's largest maker of construction and mining machines. A recent report by the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations found that this worm-like behemoth has crawled through a tax loophole to abuse our public trust. Caterpillar has quietly shifted some $8 billion in profits gained from selling parts on the global market into a Swiss subsidiary in order to avoid paying more than $2 billion in taxes owed to our country. Even though this subsidiary has only 65 employees and neither makes nor sells spare parts, Caterpillar made a slick accounting maneuver that channeled 85% of its international parts profits into what amounts to a tax shelter. Corporate officials tried to bluster their way through a subcommittee hearing, insisting that their offshoring of profits was merely meant to streamline the corporate flowchart. It was prudent, said Caterpillar's top financial officer, to eliminate the unnecessary middleman between the profits made on global sales and the paying of taxes on those profits. That's absolutely absurd, says Senator Carl Levin, the subcommittee chairman. He pointed out that the middleman she was referring to is Caterpillar itself. It designed, made, and sold the products, and the only reason it wormed its profits into a Swiss subsidiary was to cheat on the tax bill it legitimately owes in its home country. This is Jim Hightower saying, when you hear right-wingers say that America doesn't have the money for infrastructure repairs, poverty programs, etc., remember that U.S. corporate giants like Caterpillar have hidden some $2 trillion of their profits in slimy offshore wormholes.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
There's a thought. Fight for the rights of every man. And, I look at this Bergdahl thing, and it's got me just shaking my head wondering, what my grandfather would have said, what his generation would have said about a segment of a political party basically saying, let a soldier die overseas. That's really what they're saying, in essence. He's a deserter, he's a traitor, let him go. And at this time, and then this state senator, which, look, I didn't have any great expectations for this guy, but to say that unions are like Hitler, it's, again, not surprising. Anyway, on this 70th anniversary, I wanted to get someone to come talk a little bit about that time period, what it meant, which is why I've asked Harvey Kaye. He's an author and professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, here to commemorate the 70th anniversary of D-Day. Harvey, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thank you. Thank you. I always love talking to you, and I'm sorry to hear that you have a bit of a cold tonight.
We're fighting my way through it, but, I look at this anniversary and go, you know what? There are people who have had it a hell of a lot worse than I do.
Definitely. I'm not on top of your Pennsylvania politics, but this fellow who talks about unions as if they were Nazis, knows nothing about American history. For all the faults and failings of labor unions, and we know what they are. Okay, the fact is that American democracy and American freedom owe more not more, but let's say, as much to the labor movement as to any other movement in American history. We go back to the 1930s. Go back to the 1930s and remember that in the midst of that Great Depression, the two things that really pulled us out of that depression were the New Deal and the labor movement.
Yep.
Getting workers organized, enabling them, especially empowered by the new National Labor Relations Act of 1935, enabling them to advance industrial democracy in the workplace, and over the next 30 years to help raise the living standards of American working people, even those who were not in labor unions, who should have been in labor unions, were benefiting from labor struggles during those 30 years.
I look at my grandfather who fought in World War II. I never talked about it. And I have found a lot of my friends who talk about their grandparents, they never talked about their time during World War II either. But he came back from fighting fascism, fighting the Nazis, the real Nazis, not the ones that Scott Wagner thinks that he has banging around in his T-twit head.
Yeah.
But he came back here to the shop floor to fight for a middle class and to fight for something better for his children. And
that's right. You pointed to something that's fundamental that we just don't teach enough about, and that is that really from the 1930s through the 1960s, the New Deal and the labor struggles of the 30s, the fight against fascism in World War II, and don't forget, during World War II, labor unions expanded by millions as workers entered into industrial plants. And then after the war, 1 out of every 3 workers was in a labor union. And then in the 1960s, we often forget that it was the UAW and other unions that helped underwrite the civil rights movement. But what's really crucial to remember, where I was going to go, is that from the 30s to the 60s, we had what we need to appreciate was a middle-class revolution. A middle-class revolution that made the United States the first ever in human history middle-class nation. In fact, I'm more and more convinced that what we really need to be talking about today is another middle-class revolution.
Yes.
That's where we're at today.
No, I'm right there with you. And look, I talk to young people all the time who, are in their early 20s, who are saddled with a massive amount of debt. They can't find a job to move out of their parents' house, and they're struggling just to make it day to day, and they're looking for something, Harvey. They're looking, what is it that we're missing? How is it my grandparents did well and my parents did okay? The way I'm going, I'm never going to at least even do what my parents did. And sadly, statistically, that's what's being borne out. These kids right now are going to be the first generation who don't do better than their parents.
Yeah, it's a scary thought to think about these last 40 years, say mid-70s, now to mid-2014, 15, and to think that for 40 years, the middle class and American labor has been under siege by conservatives and the conservative rich. I mean, that's really what it's been. Yep. It's been, there was a political scientist named Ralph Miliband, passed away, a British political scientist that we taught in the United States for a while, who happened to have been, he was the father of the current leader of the Labour Party in Britain, Ed Miliband. And I knew Ralph Miliband, and he coined a good phrase, I'm pretty sure it's his, class war from above. And that's what we've had for these past 40 years. A declaration of war was made in the early 70s by a number of leading corporate and financial figures, and during the 70s they went to war against labor. Yep. And the victor of those first struggles was, of course, Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party. But we've never ever been able to recover the standing as working people that we had in that movement, as I was saying, from the 30s to the 60s. In this book that I wrote, which I guess we forgot to mention, The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great. As I look back on having written it, I think it really is that story of this middle-class revolution. My father fought in World War II. He fought in tanks in the Battle of the Bulge. He was a decorated veteran. And in all the years after the war, he never, ever talked about his wounds, never talked about his heroism. And I knew he had a Purple Heart. I knew he had he had a certain, standing among veterans. But I guess I just never realized what he had done, to end up wounded and to end up with a certain, kind of respect. And the fact is that all, as you were saying, all my father seemed to care about was making sure there was food on the table, a house around us.
Yep.
You know, I mean, that was what it was about. And, you know, when I think about it, for these 40 years, this ongoing class war from above, the devastation of labor unions, the taking away of pension programs, you know, there was an expression, is the pushing of risk from the shared to the individual level. Okay, yeah. The pushing and pressure on everyone to cover their own, you know, heinies, we'll call them, right? Like here on radio. I mean, it's just what's happened, right? Now, the interesting thing to think about is this: all the polls and all the surveys show that, one, Americans know how unequal this country has become between the haves and the have-nots. They know, not just know, they just know that they want government, their democratic government, to do something about it. They also know that America's infrastructure is in terrible disrepair, and people are not against paying taxes to make that happen. And they also know that the wealthy have accumulated so much wealth that it's time to restore the tax rates that we had at our finest moments in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, when the marginal tax rate on the wealthy was 90%. I mean, that's how we built the interstate highway system.
Absolutely.
That's how we built schools. That's how we built hospitals. That's how we built community, you know, infrastructure. You know, you and I have talked about this before. This class war from above, if we don't do something about it soon, the game is up.
I'm with you. And I think it was Warren Buffett who said, you know, the class war is going on and my class is winning.
Yes. Yeah, there's an honest statement for you. Absolutely honest statement. You know, I happened to be on Fox Business News a few weeks ago. Did I tell you?
I saw it. And you were very calm. I would have reached across the table and strangled that little pencil neck geek.
I'll tell you. I was a really, really... Did you happen to read the piece at Campaign for America's Future that I wrote about that?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. So I knew they were going to come at me, and I thought I got to go on air because I've got to get the message across. If not so much that I was going to convince any of the Fox Business News viewers, but I definitely want to sort of plant a flag in enemy territory.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I went on, but they really, really surprised me because they sent me a group of questions the night before, which led me to believe they might actually want to have a conversation instead of just try to take me apart. And when I got there, I'll tell you, it was hilarious. Now, one thing, I don't know if I put this in the article or not, but as I was leaving the studio after I spent 5 minutes, you know, trying to stand my ground, I did a decent job, but I sure as hell didn't get my message across powerfully. As I was leaving the studio, his woman sidekick, I don't know if I mentioned this in the article or not, she follows me out of the studio shouting at me, you know, give him an answer, we'll have you back on the show. Now, I thought about that a lot afterward, this whole scene with them, and I thought to myself, you know, if they're so eager to have me on and then attack me, they must be worried. They really must be worried.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to get it together. You know, I think there's these movements, you can feel them emerging around the country.
No, look, Harvey, the reality is, you know, as I've said, I know young people, you look at the fast food movement, you look at the fast food workers, you look at the retail workers, you look at the Gini coefficient, you start to see all of this stuff coming together where social unrest is coming because things are getting that bad for a large segment of the population.
Yeah.
People are searching, and when they find it, when that spark happens, the wealth class is worried, which is why in Mississippi they went and passed anti-worker laws that make it even harder to organize. They're outlawing protesting, they're outlawing boycotts, they're outlawing PLAs, which they don't even have PLAs in Mississippi.
Right.
But they're preemptively doing all of this stuff just in case, because they know it's coming.
Yeah. And, you know, in the 1930s, we had to break a lot of laws, and they're setting it up so we're going to have to break a lot of laws again.
Yep.
Right? I mean, that's what it seems to be coming.
Well, it comes back down to, again, I've been saying, you know, my kids are going to be the greatest generation. If you've read the book, The Fourth Turning, every fourth generation, they're the greatest generation. You go back through history because it was almost every 100 years you got to relive the same battles over and over and over again.
The fourth turning. No, I didn't know that because somebody once told me, an American historian said to me once, it skips a generation. So if your parents' generation was as progressive as you're claiming, then your kids' generation, the ones who are now in their 20s, they're gonna make things happen. So maybe we're onto something here.
Yeah, I mean, the book, The Fourth Turning, basically what they're saying is you have the greatest generation, you have the ones that live off of it, and live well off of it, which would be the baby boom generation.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have me, the decline generation.
Decline generation.
And then my children who are going to have to fight that battle over again so that their kids could be the baby boom generation again.
Yeah. You know, somebody at the New York Times asked me to think about how do you make a middle-class revolution? How do you actually make a middle-class revolution? And I said, you know, the answer may strike most people as a difficult one. Well, if we had the answer, we'd have already made it. But we know how to make it. We know how to make it because we've seen it happen before, because that's what took place in the 1930s. First of all, you need a leader who you can trust, and a leader who has, and moreover, a leader who trusts you. Not simply a leader who's willing to, to act in a particular executive fashion in Washington, but a leader who has enough confidence and faith in his fellow citizens that he's going to invite them and call upon them to get engaged, not only in the labors of Reconstruction that we're going to have, really we are going to need, but also in the struggle to make change happen. In other words, not a leader who takes office and says, turns his back on those he's told yes we can, and then says, okay, now we'll negotiate with big pharma and the insurance companies and a couple of Republicans from Maine. We need a leader who we can trust, who will be a fighter and not merely a talker.
I've said that for 9 years on the air. I want the reason the Reagan thing happened is because the Reagan Democrats saw Carter as weak. They wanted somebody who's going to stand next to him in a street fight. Even if you're wrong, they want somebody who's going to throw some punches. And Reagan was wrong on every step of the way.
Oh, absolutely.
His policies were abysmal, and in fact, you write in your article about like this new patriotism kind of thing that Reagan brought. You said Reagan pulled together a new right Republican electorate alliance of corporate elites, Christian evangelicals, and a host of conservative special interest groups, and picked up the millions of votes of disenfranchised Democrats. Millions more simply didn't vote. With a platform of lower taxes, limited government, deregulating business, reducing the power of unions, cutting welfare spending, and expanding the military, we've done all those things exactly that he wanted to do, and look at the mess it's gotten us into.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always a matter of, can we get Americans to remember? I mean, Americans know what needs to be done. But what they forget is how to do it. I'm not the only historian. I'm not the only political writer, making this case. But it's tough to break in. It's just tough to get the message out. So, Rick, there aren't a lot of you guys left in radio. So we depend on these kinds of venues to be able to tell these kinds of stories, to tell the story of how a president and a people in the 1930s responded to the Great Depression, responded to the to the right-wingers, and responded to the conservative rich, mobilized in a New Deal, subjected big business to public regulation, empowered workers to organize labor unions, organized CCC and the WPA to go out and refurbish the infrastructure, rehabilitate the environment. I mean, we've got those examples, and we've got to remember what it takes. And what it takes is a leader who trusts his fellow citizens and is willing to mobilize them for both public action and public struggle against the powers that would take us back, as they've been taking us back now, to the Gilded Age of the late 19th century, to gross inequalities.
Let me ask you this, Harvey, man, because you brought up, after the Great Depression, all of those things that came that really pulled us out of it and gave us the opportunity to create this middle class, gave my grandparents' generation a fighting chance. Did you see that as a possibility in 2008, 2009? Because I didn't think things were bad enough. The stories I heard from the Great Depression is this country was being ripped apart brick by brick, and gave Roosevelt a huge upper hand over business, who said who told him, you screwed this stuff up, now we've got to fix it. I remember 2008, people not all that upset with corporate America.
Well, here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing. The surveys show that most Americans were ready to act. Look, in 2008, we elected the very first African American to become president of the United States.
I got to be honest, Harvey. I think we could have elected a potted plant over McCain after.
Because Bush was so awful, you mean?
Because it was Bush's legacy, and it didn't matter who the Republican was. I don't think a Republican could have won that election no matter what.
That would be an interesting question. I figured that McCain blew it in two ways. One, that he actually had Sarah Palin as his running mate. Yeah. And second of all, because he looked like he was just, like he was lost in the face of the economic crisis.
Oh, he did run a horrible campaign and all of that, and Palin did not help. But the losing.
But let me come back. But let me follow up on your actual question.
Okay.
And that is, my students in 2008 were more politically revved up than I had ever seen my students become, and I've been teaching already for about 30 years. My students were so enthusiastic. They actually believed that, yes, we can. And they were ready to go to work, either by way of some, major public initiative or by way of some kind of major organizing drive. And as soon as he became president, and don't forget, that was an incredible inauguration.
Yeah, I was there.
2 million Americans turned out on the National Mall.
Yeah, I took my kids.
Well, right? 2 million from infants to, people in wheelchairs. 2 million. And I thought to myself, maybe this is even bigger than I imagined. And it turned out that as soon as the inauguration was over, what did he do? He turned around, undeniably. He had certain laws passed. He secured a stimulus plan and so on and so forth. But that was just to stabilize things. Imagine if he really had the aspirations and the ambitions and the confidence in his fellow citizens to announce a New Deal. Keep in mind, a New Deal is not just a set of policies and programs that emanate from Washington. They mobilized young people, millions of people into the Civilian Conservation Corps, young people into the National Youth Administration, young and old into the Works Progress Administration. The South was, hundreds of thousands of farmsteads in the South got electricity for the first time. The TVA. I mean, you can't go into any county in America and not find post offices and parks that weren't, they're always there. The New Deal surrounds us. I was on Bill Moyer's TV show recently, and he said to me, you say that after all of these years, in spite of all the attacks by the right and the rich, that the New Deal still nourishes us. And I knew he was expecting an answer that I was going to give him. But I looked at him and I said, Bill, you're over 65, right? He said, yes. I said, you get Social Security? He said, yeah. I said, there you go.
There you go.
There you go.
And the TVA that you brought up that Obama wants to sell off.
Yeah. I mean, is this a Democratic administration? I ask myself.
I'm with you. So let's bring this back. And we've got about a minute and a half. I mean, today's the 70th anniversary. The legacy of FDR, the legacy of these brave men who fought this battle. Just wrap it up for me.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing that I've been concerned about. I think that the ceremonies and the speeches, they're marvelous. They're beautiful. I mean, tears come to my eyes when I see these veterans who braved, the fight at Normandy, and like my father later in the Battle of the Bulge. And I think to myself, my goodness, these men would accomplish great things. But we ought to ask ourselves, what enabled them to do that? What spirit did they bring with them? It wasn't a sort of generic American spirit, however powerful that is. They themselves were a part of and witnessed Americans mobilizing in the 1930s to save the country from the economic depression. They knew what they could accomplish because they had already accomplished progressive changes in the United States. And when they went to war to fight for the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And when they came back from the war, those who were able to come back, they knew that what they were going to do is secure those things for their families. They may not have been able to do it all, but they took us really far in that direction. And we've allowed, during the last 40 years, for much of that to be lost. And we need to start reclaiming the United States.
I'm with you, Harvey. I appreciate the time. The book, The Fight for Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation, truly great. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Harvey K., thanks so much.
Thanks, Rick. Hope to speak to you again soon.
All righty. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
It's the Rick Smith Show on Country Gold Radio, WIOO Carlisle, and WEEO Shippensburg.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
A large majority of our staff are veterans. We are committed to keeping our institutions running at a professional level. We're just regular people. We're normal people who do an extremely difficult job every day. We put our lives on the line. You know, we have to go into places that most people would run from.
Gary Mills, National Legislative Coordinator for the Council of Prison Locals. The AFGE-affiliated council is concerned about overcrowding in federal prisons and maintaining safe staffing levels for prison employees. That's why they are supporting a bill in Congress to give federal judges leeway over mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenders as a way of reducing overcrowding in the prisons.
It's a bill aimed at giving the judges more leeway on mandatory minimum sentence. It's a reduction for first-time nonviolent drug users. With this Smart Sentencing Act, it will give a judge discretion that if he feels that say it's a first-time nonviolent drug offender who's never been in trouble before and his mandatory minimum currently is 5 years, he would be able to, rather than have to impose a 5-year, it would reduce it by 50%.
A new Demos report says Walmart could give its workers a raise by redirecting funds the giant retailer spends on buying back shares of Walmart stock. The report, A Higher Wage is Possible, shows Walmart has spent $6.6 billion repurchasing company stock. If that money was spent instead on workers' pay, it would put an extra $5.13 an hour into workers' pockets. Demos senior policy analyst Amy Traub says that buying back its stock boosts earnings per share and consolidates ownership of the company, mostly benefiting a small group of people. A report this week from In the Public Interest says outsourcing of public services often sets off downward spirals that the report says reduces worker wages and hurts economic stability for middle and working class communities. The report, Race to the Bottom, How Outsourcing Public Services Rewards Corporations and Punishes the Middle Class, says that the private sector often fails to uphold its promise to run public services better, faster, and cheaper than the government, sometimes with horrific results. And the report says that too often taxpayers are inadvertently contributing to growing income inequality. Outsourcing, the report finds, often hurts public services while eroding the middle class by turning middle-class jobs into poverty-level jobs. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Go on, take the money and run. Go on, take the money and run.
You know, we're going to be hearing an awful lot in the coming days about reform. And it's one of the most badly used words, I think, because a lot of the times the quote-unquote reform is more like deform. And this whole talk about changing the pensions here in Pennsylvania, really across the country, as you see these folks who've created these crises now said, hey, well, we got to fix this. We've got a huge problem, unfunded mandates as far as the eye can see. Oh, my gosh. We've got to destroy now. And that's basically what's going on in our state legislature. And the good folks over at the Keystone Research Center have come out with a new pension report, which is why I've asked their executive director, Steve Herzenberg, to come talk with us. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to do it, Rick. Good evening.
So this new Tobash plan, good, bad, what?
Ugly, I think. Nice setup there. Yeah, no, it's ugly. It's what it does is the governor last year, people may remember, wanted to put everyone in 401k type plans instead of guaranteed pension. An approach that's failed miserably in the private sector and also actually hurts taxpayers because 401ks have higher charges, more money to Wall Street, lower interest, lower returns, so less money for Main Street. So what the Tobash plan does is it goes kind of halfway. It proposes that you put partly in 401k type plans, and you keep them partly in a traditional pension, but at a much lower level of a guaranteed pension. And then if you look at the details of it, Tobash gradually shrinks the traditional guaranteed pension to nothing. Right. And then when you do the numbers, I mean, we put out our study for a couple of reasons. Partly because this is something that's coming to the legislature soon, but also, and the reason it's coming to the legislature, it's been rumored about, talked about for months, but finally, the middle of last week, there were these 4 actuaries, these 4 pension experts that each came out with a different kind of study of this Tobash plan. And again, I spent the last weekend reading this 150-page collection of all of these reports. And again, I was thinking the movie rights wouldn't fetch much money for actuaries at a pension plan. Not really light reading. But so Monday, we came out with reports that basically just made a little simpler for folks what these pension experts said. And what they said, once you broke it down, was, hey, this hybrid plan, this complicated plan, doesn't save taxpayers any money, doesn't deal with the pension debt that we've got, and, oh, by the way, cuts benefits big time. I mean, one of the things I enjoyed doing most was actually using a report by the governor's consulting actuary, and they ran all these numbers on how good the benefits were under the Tobash plan, and they actually didn't compare them to the current pensions. They just compared them to what people's final salary was, but it's not actually all that hard to compare the existing pensions with what people's final salary is. So I just kind of connected the dots. And so, again, I was able to show that the governor's own actuary was suggesting that basically half of the typical careers that they examined would have cuts in benefits of 40% or more, and then most of the rest cuts of 20% to 40%, and then just a tiny handful of folks kind of break it even. So again, from our point of view, this was a non-starter. You're not helping taxpayers. You're really crushing people in terms of retirement security, taking a big step towards making public sector workers in Pennsylvania as bad off as private sector workers are in terms of their retirement security. And so, again, you know what we do. We try to give people the information, and hopefully this information is sort of clear enough for folks that you don't want to do something that doesn't save taxpayers any money, but does ratchet down retirement security in a race to the bottom. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is the workers are going to get screwed with much less retirement security. Taxpayers are going to get screwed even more by paying more. So what's the upside? What you've laid out to me are 2 very big negatives. What's the upside?
Well, so again,
because Tobash and Corbett have got to be saying there's something good about this.
Oh, no, that's right. So here's what they're betting on. Here's what they were trying to do. They're trying to cut benefits so much that there are some savings, right? From there. So, and you look at these studies, and there is some claim that there are some savings. You've slashed benefits deeply enough that you get some savings, 15, 20, 25 years down the road.
Okay, so if we steal enough from the pensioners, we steal enough from Granny retiring so that she can only afford cat food, we've got to be able to save something. Okay, I get that.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what they're, and again, some folks, certainly including the governor and Budget Secretary Zogby, we're hoping to be able to bank some of the savings in this budget and the next few budgets. Sort of say, look, we saved all this money 20 years from now. Let's spend most of it now, because that makes our budget easier on our watch. And then, when we spent these savings, modest as they are, 5 years from now, and we still have the same pension debt but much lower benefits, that's somebody else's problem because we'll be gone.
Now I know why they. Now I know why they call your profession the dismal science.
So yeah. But even when you unpack it, even the claims that on paper that some of these studies have about savings down the road are highly questionable because for a bunch of somewhat complicated arguments, but part of it is just like the governor's plan. You are not completely, but you are really taking a lot of money out of the existing pension pools, and you're leaving most of the obligations of the existing pension plans are going to be people who are retired. So you're not going to have as much money from younger workers, current workers going in to the existing pensions. So again, one of the actuaries said, hey, what this means is if everyone in a plan is approaching retirement or in a pension plan is approaching retirement or retired already, then you've got to invest in a different way because more conservatively, because you don't think of 2006. You don't want to be doing long-term investing, lots of private equity, lots of risk when you got to pay it all out in pension checks 10 years down the road, right? So again, there's a series of detailed problems that aren't addressed in some of the numbers in these reports. And so when you look at the whole picture, the claim that there are even any savings is highly dubious. And again, I think this for us, this is a non-starter, right? If you're not helping the taxpayer and you're absolutely hammering Jill and Joe public sector, teacher, nurse, fireman, you don't want to do this. Again, these guys, you know that the fundamental thing is that Pennsylvania's pension plans are underfunded. Even bigger reason than the crash in the financial market is that there were a whole bunch of years where the state wasn't putting the money in. It was cutting corporate taxes. Every year we spend nowadays more than $3 billion. We don't collect revenue because we've cut corporate taxes on Rendell's watch and on Corbett's watch. We've cut corporate taxes by more than $3 billion a year. A small fraction of that money going into pensions like it should have been every year. And again, this corporate tax money is mostly wasted. The evidence that we're getting, more robust job growth in Pennsylvania because of these corporate tax cuts is non-existent. And so the pension debate so far mostly ducks completely the core issue. The root problem is not enough money going in. Workers who are putting in their 7 cents on the dollar of every single paycheck, or 7, and again, some years, a couple of years where employers put nothing, lots of years where they put in 2, 3, 4, 5%. So I mean, there are a couple plans.
Right. So if the bigger issue is, and look, the collapse was one thing, the Bush collapse was one thing, but as you're pointing out, the bigger issue is that they didn't put money into it. So now splitting the plans in half, setting up completely different plans, aren't you doing that even more? I mean, I know Corbett has said he wants to try and do something with the collars and not making full contributions again this year, while setting up 2 different plans and splitting that pie again. So aren't you actually making the problem much worse?
Well, again, if they went ahead and based on the claim that this new plan that cuts benefits is going to have some savings down the road, if they go ahead and reduce the collars, reduce the pension contributions in the next few years, you're exactly right. That would be completely repeating the mistakes of the past. It would be using the ostensible savings of the Tobes plan like a new credit card.
Right.
And again, like everyone in the audience knows, that if you're deep in debt and you go get yourself a new credit card and then run that up to the max, you're not better off.
Yeah, you're deeper in debt. But my question is let's say we do this hybrid plan where half of your money is going into the big fund that is in trouble, they say, and then half of it goes into a 401k type thing that Wall Street's stealing a lot of it from. Aren't you making the fund worse off because half of your money is being split away, especially from the younger workers who aren't going to use that money for years to come?
You're exactly right. So that's back to starving the existing plan in terms of money going in from those younger workers. Yeah, so that's a problem. And again,
so this is dumb.
Year, this is dumb. Yeah. I mean, it's a weaker version of exactly the problem that actually killed the governor's plan to completely shut off money from new workers into the existing pension plans. The pension experts, the so-called actuaries, they concluded that would cost an extra $40 billion last year. So the legislature, in its wisdom, concluded that was too high a price tag. And this plan does have a weaker version of that same thing. So again, a bad deal for taxpayers, a horrible deal for public sector workers. Can we please focus on the real issue? Let's put enough money. Let's restore the corporate taxes that were reasonable. Let's close the corporate tax loopholes. Let's have a Marcellus Shale tax. Let's use some of it for education, some of it for infrastructure, but some of it for pensions, and then let's start talking about what can we do for private sector workers that have nothing. That's the real issue.
Yeah.
Let's maintain the public sector pensions, and then let's address the real retirement security crisis, which is the collapse of retirement security in the private sector. But again, these folks are still obsessed with blowing up middle-class pensions for public sector workers so that we can take a step further in the race to the bottom.
To wrap this up, though, I still remember the guy from the American Enterprise Institute. He was testifying, and somebody, I forget who it was who asked him, but he said, aren't the 401ks more expensive? And he said, well, yeah, but we should do it because it's the right thing. And I never really understood what the right thing is other than ideology. I mean, he fully admitted it was going to be much more costly for taxpayers and it was going to have a lower return for retirees. But in his mind, ideologically, it was the right thing to do.
No, yeah, and that's another good thing about these reports from last week is they did their models and they basically acknowledged in the way they did their model that 401ks have lower returns, have higher costs, and so, you get lower bang for the buck, more money for Wall Street, less money for Main Street. So, again, I mean, you don't always, when you got some fancy consultant making lots of money that's going to do a study, you can't always count on that helping the working man. But in this case, and last year too, there still seems to be enough integrity in this world that we're getting information that really suggests that again these plans are a step backwards, and hopefully the legislature will listen to that.
Yeah. It just I got an email from Brian. Brian says, "Tell Dr. Herzenberg we're broke. We don't have any money." And we have the highest corporate tax income rate in the entire country.
Well, yeah, as you and I both know, almost no corporations actually pay the on-the-books tax. So, so with all due respect to Brian, when you look, this year, for example, states all across the country, California, for example, have got surpluses, lots of revenue. A problem we wish we had. We've got a deeper revenue problem this year than we did Corbett's first year. And the biggest single reason is because corporate taxes have collapsed in the last several years. So again, with all due respect to Brian, our corporate tax system is like Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
It's got, except it's all holes. Rather, there ain't much cheese in it. So we could have revenue. We're just choosing not to close the loopholes and not to tax the drillers. So there is money there. and a lot more money than we need for pensions.
And it just comes down to doing the right thing and not the ideological right thing.
Right.
Steve, I appreciate you taking time for us, explaining this very complex issue. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rick.
Thanks so much,
Take
Steve.
care.
Dr. Stephen Herzenberg, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center, KeystoneResearch.org. The website, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. You can check out the report for yourself. Quick break. Thanks for the email, Brian. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Control, blowing us in with and the better feel. I don't know what I want, and that's all that I've got. I don't think it's kept off my face.
It's time for the world in two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Heads of state and veterans from around the world gathered in France today to mark the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings. President Barack Obama spoke at a ceremony at the Normandy American Cemetery, the final resting place of some 9,387 soldiers.
Normandy, this was democracy's beachhead. And our victory in that war decided not just a century, but shaped the security and well-being of all posterity. We worked to turn old adversaries into new allies. We built new prosperity. We stood once more with the people of this continent through a long twilight struggle until finally a wall tumbled down and an iron curtain too. And from Western Europe to East, from South America to Southeast Asia, 70 years of democratic movements spread.
The president also used his remarks to praise the modern American military and the ways in which it's changed and stayed the same since 1944.
And as today's wars come to an end, this generation of servicemen and women will step out of uniform, and they too will build families and lives of their own. In their communities, and commerce and industry, and perhaps politics, the leaders we need for the beachheads of our time. And God willing, they too will grow old in the land they help to keep free.
We'll have more world news for you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in their daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to connect me. Coming Tuesday, I feel better. Even my old man looks good. It's Wednesday, it's goes so slow. Thursday, I don't know. I got money on my mind.
Yes, Friday. You got to love Fridays. On Friday, as always, we do Our Future Friday. Look at what tomorrow may be. You know what today's brought us. What's going to happen tomorrow? That's why we've asked Bill Scheer from the Campaign for America's Future here on Our Future Friday. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Always great to talk to you.
So recently, the president said he's going to use an executive order to let the EPA do a couple things. I've heard people say it's the end of the world. Job-killing regulations. What actually is he doing?
Well, the interesting thing about this is, this is a proposed rule from the EPA. It's not final yet. It gets public comment for several months, and they'll finalize it next year. And this is done because they have the authority under the Clean Air Act in 1970, and which Nixon signed. And Bush's Supreme Court in 2007 said, yes, the Clean Air Act applies to carbon pollution. So
you mean those activist judges? You mean those activists?
Exactly. So you really can't say that Obama's going rogue here, going around Congress by acting executively. Congress gave the president and the EPA this power. So they have the authority to regulate carbon pollution. They want to do it in a way that smooths the transition to an all of the above energy model, where you have more renewables, you have more natural gas, you have more nuclear. You're using less coal, but you're not eliminating coal. You're making it burn cleaner. They want to do all that in a way that's smooth. It doesn't jolt the economy.
Right.
So how do you do that? Their philosophy is, okay, have the EPA set these regulations with targets for emission cuts, but let the states decide the best way to go about it. So, and let them be creative. So if there's a way that they can meet their goals by having so-called cap and trade on a local basis, then people that emit more can buy permits, and people that emit less can sell permits. Like, there's a lot of flexibility in the system. And the people that like this are the utility companies that are being regulated. So all the right-wing scare tactics about job killing and rate hikes, the utility companies are not saying that. They're not telling their customers your rates are going to go up. They're not telling their customers this is going to kill jobs. So they've handled it, I think, in a pretty deft way, where the companies that should be directly regulated are saying, we can work with this.
And you know what's interesting to me, Bill, is, I just had a conversation with an older conservative, a guy who's probably in his 70s, who said, cap and trade was kind of a conservative idea 20 years ago. It's actually a free market idea that now the conservatives are screaming is socialism and the end of the world and going to destroy our nation. And it's interesting how 20 years ago, their ideas, Democrats have now taken on and said, okay, let's do this, and it's no longer what the crazies want.
We did cap and trade under Bush Sr. to eliminate the problem of acid rain, and a lot of industry said this was going to be a job killer back then, and it turned out not to be true. In 2008, when it was Obama versus McCain for the presidency, both candidates supported cap and trade. And Republicans were saying they were okay with it back in 2008, not that long ago. And so it's very strange to see them flip so dramatically just because a Democrat is in the White House. But this, just like with Obamacare, just with the idea of the individual mandate, these were Republican ideas that were meant to use the power of the free market and use the power of individual responsibility, corporate responsibility to achieve policies for the common good. And when Democrats listen to them, people start ideas them over partisan ways. That certainly people discount the idea.
I look at myself. We went a couple of years back, invested and put solar panels on the house, just because we thought it was a good idea. We get about 45% of our electricity from the panels that we put on our house, and right now there's a movement going on to charge me for being able to put panels on my house even more than I spent. If for some reason on a certain day I happen to sell some back to the grid, they want me now to pay a fee, and it's here in Pennsylvania. It's going on across the country. The whole idea is to destroy my choice, my free market participation. It's astounding how the promoters.
Well, it's an interesting story because the push to make solar customers pay more is being driven by the Koch brothers, driven by this group ALEC.
The American Legislative Exchange Council, sure.
Right, which is a conservative group that tries to pass right-wing legislation at the state level. And in Arizona, they have fought the Koch brothers successfully with a coalition led by Barry Goldwater Jr. And he created a group called TUSC, and I forget what the acronym stands for. It was Teleutilities, Solar, something, Solar can say, something like that. And they're making a conservative case in a conservative state that customers should have the choice of what kind of energy they use, and that there shouldn't be government policies that take away people's choice. And this is what a lot of environmental advocates are always saying. If you have a level playing field, if you don't tilt the game towards big oil, then renewable energy can be an affordable choice, and people will choose it on their own volition. But you gotta have a level playing field.
Yep.
And the Koch brothers have had a hard time winning these arguments, even in conservative states, because that argument is very persuasive.
Yeah, the name of the group is Teleutilities. Solar won't be killed. And I look at a place like Arizona, and last summer when we did our People's Tour for America, our cross-country labor history tour, of which the book will be out July 1st, we went through Arizona, and there are, just not fields, I mean, it's the desert, but there are huge amounts of acreage covered with solar panels. So I got to imagine that whoever invested in that wants to make sure that their investment stays semi-lucrative.
Right. And there are a lot of states where, like take Texas, for example, it's obviously a big oil state, but it's also a big natural gas state, and it's also a big wind state.
Huge wind state.
So
we went through one section, Bill, where you could see nothing but windmills for as far as the eye could see. And if you've ever been through Texas, it is dead flat, especially where we went through. And it was amazing. I didn't know that they were the largest wind-producing state, but you saw these wind fields. It was just amazing.
And that's Rick Perry, who's the governor there, and he might run for president in 2016. He's shaking his fist at these EPA regulations, but in fact, his state is actually way ahead of the game, and is not going to have a hard time meeting the targets by the EPA, because the EPA is flexible on a state-by-state basis, and they can meet the targets by whatever energy sources make the most sense for that state. Wyoming, which is the biggest coal state, is also a very significant natural gas state, and so the reaction there has been mixed, because the natural gas representative is saying this rule means probably more natural gas getting produced and getting consumed. So it's an interesting move on Obama's part. I think it's going to be a real legacy item for him. And the question becomes, how well can it be defended in some of these tight Senate races? Because you have a lot of Senate races in coal states and oil states. Can the people on the ground there say, wait a second, it is not going to hurt these industries, it's going to help us transition in a smooth way, or people are going to try to demagogue it, that we don't know.
Well, we've got Governor Corbett, who's in big trouble here. And the first thing he came out with after the primaries were over was attacking Tom Wolf, the Democratic candidate, who's, I think at this point, 25 points ahead. But the first attack was he's going to kill jobs by being with Obama and this proposed EPA rule.
And and some of the Senate candidates, for example, in Kentucky, Allison Grimes,
right?
She's gonna sidestep it and say, I hate this plan too. This is a bad proposal. I hate it. So don't vote for McConnell over that, because we agree. There's gonna be some of that, but remember, Congress can't stop this without having a 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto. Obama has the authority on its own without congressional action.
Right.
So a certain degree of Democrats on the ground playing a little two-step and wagging the finger at Obama, that can't stop the rule. What Obama's going to worry about is, does it become so hated? Does it become toxic, where it causes a huge political wave, not just in 2014 but 2016. You have a Republican president in 2017, and then they can scrap the whole thing. This happened in Australia. Australia had a carbon tax, and they have a big mining industry there. It caused a big backlash, and it swept the Labour Party out of power. So it's a real political risk he's taking here. But again, I think this rule is not as crude a measure as was in Australia. This is a much more creative approach that is going to not be as harsh an impact, particularly in these states that have mixed energy sources.
Yeah, because I've had a number of my environmental friends who wanted to see this go much further, and we're mad that it didn't, because this is fairly moderate. I mean, for as much stink as we're hearing from the Republicans, for as much soapboxing as we're hearing, this isn't that big of a leap, is it?
No, I remember, we have under Obama, for the first time, since ever, we actually cut our carbon emissions. So this has been happening over the past 5 years while the economy has grown. Obviously, the economy is not where we want it to be, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was under Bush. Because just as a matter of numbers, the economy has grown while we have cut emissions. The two things are not incompatible. And this doesn't go that far beyond the trajectory we've already been on. And so you can knock that a few different ways. You can say it's not ambitious enough. It doesn't solve the problem by itself. But as opposed to folks say on the left, some folks on the right say, well, this isn't going to solve global warming by itself, and so why bother? You can't do this without China or India. It's a global problem, so why should we go first? Well, here's the thing. Next year, there is a UN climate summit where they're going to try to forge a global agreement, and the other countries we're watching, is America going to show leadership? Are they going to put their cards on the table? And China, when this came out, some of the folks are saying, okay, America is walking the walk. That's what we wanted to see. Now we can have a real conversation in 2015. So it can't solve the problem by itself, but does it bring the other countries along? There's a lot of hope that it's going to do that.
What's interesting is you said that people on the right were saying that this isn't going to solve global warming. I'm surprised you found people on the right who believe in global warming.
Well, they're having a tricky time, agreeing what their message should be. You had Marco Rubio say, we can't trust the scientists on this, and then got kind of beat around with that. Then you have folks like John Boehner and Governor Rick Scott in Florida starting to use the line, well, I'm not a scientist, just to duck the whole question entirely. And then you have the head of the National Mining Association, who was on Stephanopoulos' ABC show on Sunday. He was as point blank, you reject the science, and you would not say that. He said coal can do its part to cut emissions. So I think there's an increasing understanding that the science argument is over.
Right.
It is happening. There's a fair debate that how do you solve the problem? What's the best approach? Well, let's at least all start from the beginning point that this is an actual problem that needed to be solved. I think Republicans are slowly starting to realize that denying the whole thing is not a political winner.
Yeah, because honestly and truthfully, I mean, you look at the stances they've taken on immigration, on Obamacare, and on climate science. In the next generation, I could see them being the minority party forever because they were wrong.
I mean, that's what they have to come to terms with. In the 90s, early 90s, after Democrats, we lost in 1980 with Jimmy Carter, we lost with Monday, we lost with Dukakis. There are certain things where Democrats said, okay, sure, maybe in our heart of hearts we believe in, abolishing the death penalty. In our heart of hearts, we don't want to end, lifetime welfare benefits if you're poor. But Bill Clinton came along and said, you know what? We're just not going to win elections this way. We got to take our medicine. We got to cut the cord of a couple of these things that are near and dear to us to say to the public, you know what? We're a serious governing majority party, and hear me out on the other issue. And I don't change my personal view on those subjects myself. It was kind of a painful concession to have to make, but end of the day is Clinton won and got to do a lot of things that I do like because he was able to make his case to the public. I think Republicans merely got to lose one more time before they come to before they hit rock bottom. But there's certain things where they're going to have to say, you know what, climate science is real. Latinos vote too. You got to do something about immigration. You can't just cut taxes for the wealthy in perpetuity and have economic growth that's been disproven. Certain things that they're going to have to come around now. We'll see if they've caught why it's reality yet.
Yeah, but do you think the Texas open carry Tea Party types are going to let that happen?
Well, obviously they're not going to go down without a fight, but you had an example in North Carolina where the Congresswoman Renee Elmers was being very aggressive in her pro-immigration reform stance. She went on Laura Ingram's radio show and had it out with her, calling her views ignorant. And the Tea Party challenger in that race tried to make hay of it and tried to make that the wedge issue to win their primary, and he got trounced. You haven't had an example of this primary season of an anti-immigrant candidate ousting a Republican who had suggested they would be for immigration reform. So some say he may be prevailing, but we'll see how things shake out in this congressional session. They have a window without immigration between now and the end of July for Republicans in the House to act, or Obama's going to do executive action on deportation reform, and then go to Republicans and say, look, you guys could have danced with me. You could have gotten some points from the Latino community and danced with me. You missed your opportunity, and now I get all the glory. They got 6-7 weeks to decide what they want to do there.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting couple of weeks, and this election should shake a lot of things out. Especially with as crazy as some of the extremes of the right have gotten. And have you been following this Texas open carry thing? I mean, it's almost nuts.
I haven't followed it closely. I saw a little thing that the NRA had to expunge from their website a statement about the whole stuff. I have not followed the specifics of what the bill is.
I mean, the picture that is significant to me is you've got this woman holding a set of twins, one in each arm, and over her shoulder she has thrown a semi-automatic weapon. And I'm going, and she says, I've got to be safe. How in the hell does that keep you safe when the gun's over your? What are you going to do? Drop the kids?
I mean, there is certainly this faction of the NRA which has totally lost their bearings. There's plenty of responsible gun owners who aren't that glib about the subject of guns near their kids. I mean, there's a situation here where I live in Massachusetts where a young child was tragically actually killed himself at a gun show because he was given a semi-automatic. And he was a young kid, and didn't have proper supervision. So I mean, these are real horrible stories that really are. It doesn't make the gun rights case to be arguing that we should have young children, around guns willy-nilly. That's not to mean you can't take your kid out go hunting or whatnot, but that's a whole different matter. We're talking about things like semi-automatics.
Yeah, I tell you, I don't want to go into a restaurant with a bunch of yahoos with their guns strapped over their shoulders, and when one guy goes to reach for the salt, a couple of them go off, and I end up getting shot. Just not.
We just had this case in Seattle where a shooter was taken down by someone with pepper spray, not with a gun. They always say, the only stuff the good guys with bad guys are the good guy with a gun. There's other ways to stop shooters that don't involve having everyone armed and having a lot of innocents be shot by mistake.
Or maybe make it more difficult for the shooters to get the gun in the first place.
Right.
Just a thought.
And there's plenty of ideas out there that don't limit the rights of law-abiding citizens that want to hunt or want to go to home for protection. They're pretty. I mean, not every regulation is obviously going to work. There's a lot of debate what's going to be effective or not. But you got to try things. There's a lot of things you could be trying that don't in any way infringe the rights of people's Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, I'm with you. Bill Scheer, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a great night. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. I'm the talk.
It's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
If it comes a hot August day and you have no air conditioning, you can blame the president.
Republicans attack new EPA emissions standards, but
our country must take action to address climate change.
They were for emissions cuts before they were against them. Good news for endangered wolves, plus Los Angeles oil spill reveals major flaw in pipeline oversight.
I refuse to believe there are any flaws in pipeline oversight.
All of those flaws and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
It's the most significant effort any president has ever taken to combat global warming. Second place, of course, is a 43-way tie for nothing.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner said this the other day when asked about climate change.
Well, listen, I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
So he wasn't qualified to discuss it in 2014, but long ago, before the Citizens United case, John Boehner said,
the fact is that we have had climate change. Clearly, humans have something to do with it.
So way back when, Republicans were more than happy to recognize what everybody knows about science, but something changed since then, eh?
Yeah, I wonder what that could be, but we'll have more on that in a moment. First, as we reported earlier this week, the Environmental Protection Agency proposed the first ever standards to reduce carbon pollution from power plants, the nation's single largest source of the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming. Immediately, polluters and their friends in Congress launched a massive PR campaign to stop those new pollution standards. Here's Republican Senator Rand Paul of Coal State, Kentucky, on Fox News.
If it comes a really cold day in January and there's not enough heat, you know who you can blame. The Democrats tried to pass it and they didn't have enough votes, so now they're going to try to do this through executive edict. And I don't think that's legal.
Rand Paul either doesn't know or doesn't care that the new emission standards are required by law through the Clean Air Act, passed by a previous Congress, and through multiple Supreme Court decisions. President Obama used executive authority because Republicans in Congress have blocked all other pollution legislation, including the 2009 cap-and-trade bill, even though that bill was based on a Republican cap-and-trade proposal from the 2008 presidential campaign.
So to be clear here, the law requires the EPA to put these regulations in place. The EPA is part of the executive branch. Barack Obama is following the law in issuing these regulations as directed by the Supreme Court, and Rand Paul is furious about it, calls it illegal.
Yep, but they didn't always say that. Here's John McCain from 2008.
I've been to Greenland, I've been to the South Pole, I've been to the Arctic. I know it's real. I've been involved in this effort for many years, and we've got to act.
And here's Mike Huckabee.
I think we ought to have some cap and trade. And we ought to declare that we will be oil-free of energy consumption in this country within a decade.
And for good measure, here's Mitt Romney.
You're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
Oh, and don't forget Sarah Palin.
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change.
So all of that was before 2010, before the Citizens United decision, before the Koch brothers and the oil companies was allowed to purchase the Republican Party lock, stock, and barrel.
Yep. And not to put too fine a point on it, but the EPA's new emission standards are actually less stringent than the plan put forward by candidate John McCain in 2008. In other news, remember that pipeline rupture in Los Angeles a few weeks ago?
I do.
It flooded an entire LA street knee-deep in crude oil.
It did.
InsideClimate.org reports that the LA pipeline rupture exposed an even bigger hole in pipeline oversight. Turns out the company that owns the pipeline, Phillips 66, told regulators the pipeline was dormant when they bought it, and they didn't even know it was full of oil because they were never required to verify that they inspected it or that it was emptied in compliance with regulations because they're not required to.
So they were actually not using this pipeline. It was full of oil, and they had no idea?
Yep.
Why would they buy a pipeline if they weren't going to use it?
They're planning on using it. They just weren't using it right now, and they didn't bother to verify that it had been emptied. Finally, remember the lone wolf, the lonely young male wolf in search of a mate that crossed over the border from Oregon into California several months ago?
I do not.
He became a media star because he crossed into California looking for a mate, but there are no wolves in California because they were eradicated decades ago.
Sad.
Well, some good news. That wolf is now confirmed to be raising a litter of pups back over the border in Oregon. The confirmation came on the same day as the California State Fish and Game Commission voted to elevate gray wolves in the state to endangered species status.
And once again, you end the week on a happy note. Smartly done, Desi Doyen. For much more on those stories and the others we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on your public airwaves. Listen to us anytime for free via Stitcher, iTunes, or TuneIn. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Just when you thought it was safe, those crazy Republicans are at it again. It's time for the Rick Smith Show's Conservative Alerts.
I'm going up the rails on a crazy train.
Oh yeah, crazy train. Yeah, that's. I think that's a good. That's a good analogy. The off the rails, the Herman Cain train. This whole gun thing, and I keep going back to this Texas open carry nonsense, because I think it's going to spread. I think you're going to get a couple of yahoos. Hey, let's all do that like they're doing. I guess in South Carolina they're trying. I guess. Early report that a Target store in Myrtle Beach. My father-in-law lives in Myrtle Beach. The kids go to Myrtle Beach every year for 2 weeks to spend time with Grandpa. May have actually been in this Target store. Evidently last week, an employee cleaning up, the toy aisle by the superhero play school toy box. There in open view, a loaded gun. And according to the shopper who happened to see it, he said, I don't think someone would accidentally drop off a gun. He said that thought it was purposely left there for a child to pick up and think, oh, it's a toy gun, and accidentally pointed at somebody. And it goes off. And you stop and you think about how twisted that thought process is. But you know what? It kind of sounds logical. It was a 9mm handgun with 8 bullets in it. No one reported it stolen. They didn't know who owned it. So you start going, hey, whose damn gun is this? Oh, but we don't have to report lost or stolen guns, or ones that we just lay around at the Target. Oh, I mean, think about that. How many people have kids? How many times have you walked into a toy store and the kids' hands are everywhere? They're running, looking at this. Oh, can I have this? Can I have this? Now, my kids have never picked up a gun and pointed it at me, but, you kind of got to wonder. Now, the Texas open carry people say, well, that was probably planted there by some liberal. Liberals don't have guns. Which is interesting, because I've had this conversation with a number of my liberal friends, and I tell them, look, you're outgunned, literally. Maybe you need to be buying guns. But this is just kind of bizarre. Speaking of bizarre, with all of the problems we have here in the Commonwealth, with the roads, some of the worst. I went up to Scranton today. I had a couple of meetings that I had to go to for the show, and just doing my normal work outside of actually sitting here doing the content of doing the programming and reaching out to new stations and stuff like that. I took a trip up to Scranton, and I-81. I gotta tell you, we're bouncing along on the road, and you're on the phone, and the person on the other end of the phone's going, "What is that noise?" That's the road. Every, boom, 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 boom. And those of you who are out on 81 now, you're hearing it. And I'm going, one of the worst roads in the state. There's that stretch of 78 where you don't sit if you're driving a truck, you're not sitting in the seat long. You think of all of the money that's not being invested in education. You think of all of the bridge down in Delaware. You think of all of these things that need to be done. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done. Potholes need to be filled. Infrastructure needs to be updated. Investments for the future need to happen. Regulatory oversight of the drillers, maybe. There's a thought. Lots of stuff. Our legislature, the Pennsylvania House, decided on Wednesday that, you know what, this is a good time to move us a step closer to having a state gun. Just what we need. We need a state gun. Everybody else, well, not everybody. 4 states have state guns, but we could be like 4 other states. We could have a state gun. Yes, the Pennsylvania long rifle. And I'm going, you know what I bet? As soon as they pass the Pennsylvania long, you're going to see a bunch of yahoos walking around with long guns. You're going to see people going, it's all right. And we're going to, you know it's coming. Because you can't give people an inch, it seems like, anymore. I don't know that society is capable of handling responsibility at this point. You know, I think back, you know, and today, really, honestly, with today being the 70th anniversary of D-Day, I spent a lot of time thinking about my grandfather, which I have, you know, it's been a number of years now since his passing. And admittedly, we did not get along well when I was younger. When my mother died at 13, I went to live with them, and it didn't go well from 13 to 18. Really. He was a very domineering figure, imposed a lot of... It wasn't until years later, looking back, that a lot of the philosophy, a lot of the things that he said actually sunk in. But I think back and I go, you know, that generation, they understood society. They understood family and community. And I seriously doubt that generation would have allowed a bunch of yahoos to go walking around looking for trouble. And this idea, let's spend, you know, there's an argument to be had of, you know, maybe we do need to downsize the legislature. Maybe we need to downsize it to a part-time, because if this is all you've got time to do, if that other stuff doesn't matter, maybe, just a thought, maybe we should be looking at some other stuff. Now, along with the Pennsylvania long gun, the state gun, I guess we're going to have a state aircraft as well. You know, there's an amendment for the Piper Cub Amendment, which will be the official state aircraft. I'm going, really? Do we have an official state toilet tissue? Do we have one of that? We should. We should spend some time debating that. Wow. Left-handed or right-handed? We should debate that as well. Nuts. And really just, well, ridiculous. You'll love this as well. Another one of those stories that just grabs your attention. The Texas GOP had its convention, and Davy Crockett, Davy Crockett, a Davy Crockett impersonator, called for the violent overthrow of Barack Hussein Obama and his administration. He was dressed in buckskins and carrying a raccoon skin, which he called Buster. And said that you never be a member of a party that ends with the name of Rat. I had to go there. Says I want Texas to run red with the greatest candidates that ever have been anywhere in the state. Says he's a little disappointed. He says he came down from Tennessee to fight with the great Republic of Texas against a narcissistic, tyrannical dictator. And here, 176 years later, I've got to come back and fight against a narcissistic, tyrannical dictator again. Who's going to help me? I think there's some folks in white coats. Sounds like something our Davy Crockett imitator probably needs. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go. Stitcher on the smartphone. Soon we'll have the Rick Smith Show app up and running. I'm hoping by Monday. Quick break. Back with Hour 3. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better. It's the Rick Smith Show on Country Gold Radio, WIOO Carlisle, and WEEO Shippensburg.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
A large majority of our staff are veterans. We are committed to keeping our institutions running at a professional level. We're just regular people. We're normal people who do an extremely difficult job every day. We put our lives on the line. You know, we have to go into places that most people would run from.
Gary Mills, National Legislative Coordinator for the Council of Prison Locals. The AFGE-affiliated council is concerned about overcrowding in federal prisons and maintaining safe staffing levels for prison employees. That's why they are supporting a bill in Congress to give federal judges leeway over mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenders as a way of reducing overcrowding in the prisons.
It's a bill aimed at giving the judges more leeway on mandatory minimum sentence. It's a reduction for first-time nonviolent drug users. With this Smart Sentencing Act, it will give a judge discretion that if he feels that say it's a first-time nonviolent drug offender, has never been in trouble before, and his mandatory minimum currently is 5 years, he would be able to, rather than have to impose the 5 year, it would reduce it by 50%.
A new Demos report says Walmart could give its workers a raise by redirecting funds the giant retailer spends on buying back shares of Walmart stock. The report, a higher wage is possible, shows Walmart has spent $6.6 billion repurchasing company stock. If that money was spent instead on workers' pay, it would put an extra $5.13 an hour into workers' pockets. Demos senior policy analyst Amy Traub says that buying back its stock boosts earnings per share and consolidates ownership of the company, mostly benefiting a small group of people. A report this week from In the Public Interest says outsourcing of public services often sets off downward spirals that the report says reduces worker wages and hurts economic stability for middle and working class communities. The report, Race to the Bottom, How Outsourcing Public Services Rewards Corporations and Punishes the Middle Class, says that the private sector often fails to uphold its promise to run public services better, faster, and cheaper than the government, sometimes with horrific results. And the report says that too often taxpayers are inadvertently contributing to growing income inequality. Outsourcing, the report finds, often hurts public services while eroding the middle class by turning middle-class jobs into poverty-level jobs. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Minimum wage! Yeah!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So as I've been saying, earlier in the week here in Harrisburg, a big rally of minimum wage workers and supporters saying, hey, a $10.10 an hour at least. And I've been saying, look, I don't think $10.10 an hour is enough. I know Lieutenant Governor candidate Stack had said $12 an hour. In Seattle, for instance, they've gone to 15 over the next couple of years. And I keep saying that's where we need to be talking about, actually making low-wage workers' lives better. And you know what? I bunch of emails from people around the country that we have contacts with saying we need to be going bigger. And the Seattle victory could be huge, which is why I've asked Dave Freiboth. He's the executive secretary treasurer of the King County Central Labor Council out there in Seattle. He was the guy who led the charge to get to that $15 an hour. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure.
So, I look at this, what you've done, as kind of a blueprint to move forward for other communities.
I've been asked that a few times and asked, what I thought about that. And I hope we're establishing a best practice, to use the jargon. But it really is dependent on each community to understand how their coalition work will actually leverage their collective power. I think maybe that is the backdrop to all this, is collective power. And I would like to say that while it's very flattering to hear that I led the charge, I was actually part of the leadership that led the charge. We had a few strong labor leaders in the leadership roles, both affiliated with the Labor Council and not. He changed to win. SEIU changed to win folks that actually were able to a degree, check the egos and work together in this coalition that produced this result.
All right, I'll let you have that. That's a fair point. It's not a singular victory thing. It's a group thing. I get it. But you also live in a state where it's possible. Here in Pennsylvania, it would be impossible for Philadelphia or Harrisburg or Pittsburgh or any other city, municipality, or borough in this state to have a campaign like you guys ran, because thanks to our Republican friends, they have made it illegal for us to do what you guys have done.
Well, I think that's why it's so important to where, democratic principles are still alive and haven't been trampled on by the corporate interests, that we exercise it. I mean, this was important for us. But those of us that were in this fight locally understand, the urban power building, that progressive change historically comes from progressive urban cores, and we have to leverage this wherever we can. And we're just fortunate that we've been able to stave off the attacks. We don't live in utopia out here. We have had very close elections where we could be in the same soup that you folks in Pennsylvania are in right now.
Yeah.
So it's not like we've got a corner on the progressive market out here.
Well, what you've done, and I think effectively, is you've convinced people that it's in their interest to be involved. And I think we're getting to that point here where you start talking about, let's really raise the bar and go out and fight. And I'm sure the message against you was job killer and companies are going to flee the state. I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah, and it was, but it was interesting how businesses who rely so much on statistics when they're in their favor, the statistics that is, relied almost wholly on anecdotal suppositions to make their case. The statistics really don't bear out in an absolute matter that raising the wages of the lowest results in long-term job-killing business environment. So that's really one of the myths that we exploded. And of course, it's that old law thing. When the law's with you, you argue the facts, and when the law's against you, you argue the circumstances. Right. So in this case, the business community really didn't have the facts with them decisively. So they resorted to, like I said, supposition. If this happens, we're probably going to have to lay people off.
Now, I understand there's a lawsuit coming. Tell me about it.
Well, it's interesting. For one, like I said, I was part of a leadership group, and we all had, which was our strength. We had these different perspectives on where we thought the threats were, and where I focused was on this franchisee issue. Our minimum wage law got complicated, and in fact, as a side note, I was asked by the Wall Street Journal the other day why we, implying that labor and progressives made it so complicated. And I said, well, it's actually the business community that wanted all these exceptions and rules and things like that. But the one element that I was most concerned with was the law takes employee count nationally in terms of determining whether they're a large business or a small business. So what we basically did was challenge the large corporate fast food business model of basically exploiting franchisees, these quote-unquote owners of franchises, as that the right likes to call small businesses. And we lumped them in with the large corporate scheme, which to me, it was a direct threat to their business model. And while maybe some in the business world can pass off what we're doing in Seattle is those wacky liberals in Seattle, if they want to screw up their business environment, well, so be it. But when we started setting a practice, potentially setting a precedent on what constitutes a large and small business, that was sure to get their attention, and it appears that it's done that.
Yeah, I look at this, and could this be the thing that unravels? Because I talked about this the other night, that it looks like it's something that could unravel the entire step forward that you guys have made.
I don't think it would unravel. I mean, nothing's for sure when you go into these territories, these uncharted waters, in terms of this kind of a minimum wage increase. But at the end of 7 years, and after the cost of living adjustments further out, almost to 10 years, all workers are going to be at a cost of living adjusted minimum wage of $50. It's going to be the same for all businesses. Actually, with the adjustments, it'll be closer to $18 an hour when we get out, down the road with the phase-in. So if we lose this battle, what it's going to mean is that they're going to continue to get away with this franchisee scam that they're doing.
Right.
But it still means that those employees eventually are going to be up to the same minimum wage as large corporations.
Well, that's a good thing, because to me, raising it up to $9 or $9.50, I think Michigan did $9.50. I don't know that really raises the bar or helps those at the very bottom, the folks that it's supposed to help, because we've been subsidizing low-wage work in this country for at least since the 90s, when we said it was okay to be a low-wage worker and we'll subsidize it, or maybe even back to Reagan with the earned income tax credit. But we've been subsidizing these low-wage workers, and so we raise the minimum wage a couple bucks, and we take back food stamps, or we take back heating assistance or rent assistance or whatever, and it's a break even. They're no better off than they were before.
Well, that's true, and that's people will say, well, how'd you come up with 15? And some will say, well, you threw a dart against the wall. Well, that's not fair at all. When you look at it on an evidence-based, from an evidence-based perspective, using self-sufficiency calculators, and we have one in Seattle that was developed by the University of Washington. There's others around the country. What we find is that for different family makeups, a livable wage that gets people off of public assistance varies, but we found that if 15 does the best job of rising most people out of assistance, but you're absolutely right. That's just getting them off of public assistance. It doesn't then do the rest of the job, which to me is where collective bargaining comes in, which is, to me, the next step, is restoring collective bargaining rights in this country so we can actually restore the middle class. So the minimum wage is the floor it's intended to be, and then collective action by workers is what actually builds a middle class.
Which is what we're seeing in the fast food forward campaign and the fast food global campaign. They're saying, yeah, we want the $15, but we also want that voice that we get the ability to sit and negotiate.
Right, and what's been gratifying with this is there's a columnist in Seattle named at the time, Seattle Times, named Danny Westmead, and he's kind of in the middle of the road, skeptical of some of our stuff. You can't say he's a laborite, but he got the collective bargaining in one of his columns, the collective bargaining connection, and in fact made the case that if business really wants a private sector solution to wage inequality, it's collective bargaining, not a government mandated floor.
Yep.
So we're seeing some traction where I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I've not seen this kind of traction in terms of workers' rights.
See, now that's the case that I've been making, because I can make a very libertarian argument that labor shouldn't want minimum wages or maximum hour laws or any of those things. Those are things you sit down and you bargain for when you sit down at the table. And because I've had a number of people have asked me, why, Dave, why are you out there fighting for a minimum wage? None of your members make minimum wage, and it's not going to really affect them. Why are you doing it?
Well, and that's the old Gompers AFL producerism attitude, that we don't want the government mucking in our stuff. Just give us our collective action.
Right.
And of course, getting into the minutiae of labor history, but that's what John L. Lewis and the mine workers and the CIO eventually figured was not the total solution. That the total solution was a combination of collective action in the private sector and government action advocacy for a social safety net, and it was the symbiotic relation between the two that built the middle class. And that's the next step, is making that connection, restoring real collective bargaining rights in this country is the next step. And this minimum wage campaign brings that awareness. And in fact, what you just outlined in terms of the criticism, I heard from some of our more conservative elements in labor. And our job in leadership is to look beyond that, is to make the connection. That's our role.
Yeah, and coming up, someone had asked me how $15 an hour came up, and I said McDonald's. I said, McDonald's came up with it, and they go, how'd that happen? I go, well, did you see the website that they put out a couple of months ago, where they were trying to, in a very patriarchal way, tell their employees how to budget their money? and they had a first income of 40 hours a week, and then miraculously a second income of nearly 40 hours a week, which is about $15 an hour. And that's where I came up with it, because McDonald's told me so.
Right. No. It's hard when you get into the evidence. It's hard for them to ignore the corporate types, the facts that kind of a wage, right around $15, is what it takes just to be sufficient. That doesn't mean you're, as a family, able to save for college, to put something away for retirement. That just means you're sufficient. But I'd be less than honest and say there was a little marketing in it too. I mean, hell, they've been killing us with marketing.
Yeah.
You know, Super Bowl ads that get you weepy over them selling Jeeps for crying out loud. I mean, we need to learn from what they're doing to us, and part of it is you take a simple concept to promote a very important economic element like a minimum wage, and branding it at 15. It was just very recognizable. It did the job, and it was something that simplified the message so that we could get the center. We could get those folks that weren't really sure whether this was good or bad. And in Seattle, we got most of them thinking it was good in the end.
Yeah, I think it's great, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the coming weeks and months, because I think other areas are looking with great anticipation to see what comes of it. You know, the other argument that I've made, and you know, I've always said that I don't think that the people who pay minimum wage really care if the minimum wage goes up. I think the people who are firmly against it are the people who pay a little bit above minimum wage, because they understand there's a ripple upward. As soon as that floor is raised, you got that guy who's, if it's raised to $15 an hour, you got the guy who's making $15 going, hey, I'd like 16 or 17.
Yep.
That's what they're really afraid of.
Absolutely, and that was our battle over tip credit. In this state, we don't have tip credit. We actually, did a temporary compromise on that, which was pretty distasteful. But anyone who's ever negotiated a labor agreement knows sometimes there's things you do for the greater good.
Sure.
And you hope it's the right direction. But in this case, it got us, the kind of deal that we needed. But the point is that what the hospitality industry wanted to do was to start counting tips towards wages so that they would not be affected by the wage compression you're exactly talking about. Hospitality workers in the front of the house that are making minimum wage plus tips are making over that. If they're not able to count their tips and defeat the compression, then their costs go up across the board. And of course, that's what we want. We want more disposable income. That's what they don't want. And you're right on the money. That is the bigger picture that they're really concerned about.
Now, the answer in Seattle, as I see it, is that minimum wage then spreads outward, because I'm sure that there'll be those who try and make an example, because I believe there's got to be a floor under all wages, and the minimum is what it is, the minimum. And what I've seen across the country is we've subsidized these minimums for so long that we've gotten used to really poverty wages for workers at the very bottom, and then patting them on the head and say, well, we'll give you these things just to make up for it.
Well, and then there's the education myth, and that's been so played. And the Gates Foundation, while they do some good work around the world, they perpetuate that myth here, locally and globally, is that to get economic viability, you need better education. Well, that begs the question: who deserves poverty wages? And of course, from a labor standpoint, that's a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious: no one does. Every job deserves respect. So you're right. The minimum should be at least a respectful wage for someone either to start from or to be able to maintain some amount of viability. I mean, my old man, when he started, he didn't have any skills. He had a family. He had kids, and he was buying a house back in the 50s.
Yeah? No, my grandfather too.
Right. In that economy, you could do that. In this economy, you can't with no skills.
Even in my lifetime.
Unless you're in a union.
Exactly. Even in my lifetime, back in the mid to late 80s, I didn't have enough money to finish college, and I went to work on a trucking shipping dock. I was throwing boxes on a shipping dock for $15 an hour with health care and a pension. This is 1988. They don't make $15 an hour today, and we're talking 20-some years later.
Well, and I think the hope here, and it's too bad it's gotten to this, is that the Occupy movement has not gone away. And those that kept asking what their demands were missing the point. What we saw in this movement, this grassroots movement, that quite frankly, the socialist movement in town very effectively organized with the dissatisfied younger people that have educations, that were told to go get an education, they'd be economically viable. They're stuck in barista's job at barely above minimum wage, and are convinced that the system is not working, and that they need to mobilize. And it was that grassroots organizing that was done beyond labor. It was done, in the community amongst various elements, plus our institutional wherewithal and presence in the political structure. It was that coalition, that ability to work together that actually got it done. And, we have a tendency in labor to look at others outside the labor movement that are doing grassroots organizing and say, why aren't we doing that internally? And my view is we should be saying, well, how can we help that?
Exactly.
It shouldn't be something that we have to own for it to be valid. And I think that was our strength here, is that coalitions are tough. Herding cats is the son of a gun, but we got it done. We were able to maintain the focus on this and keep our disagreements internal and continue to exercise our collective power. And the other side, there was nothing they really could do about it. We got a unanimous city council vote.
Yeah, no. Look, if back during the Bread and Roses strike, they could overcome a 22 different language barrier. Yep. We can certainly overcome some egos.
Yeah, absolutely. We get out of our lethargy and our sense of entitlement as a labor movement, and our sense that in some of our resentment, right, that we've been doing this so long, and who are these these kids coming along that think they've got another answer? We can overcome that. We can exert this kind of power.
Yep. Well, I give you nothing but credit for the work that you guys have done out there. It is in my view, it's a victory that those of us around the country can look to and say it's possible. We just need to do the hard work to get to it.
Well, thank you. And I got to give credit to a few of the big unions, and there were a lot of little ones, but, the SEIU, the UFCW, and the Teamsters out here were key in resources and leadership. And it was a community effort. I mean, IAM and all the other unions, AFSCME, were very much involved, the building trades. But we had some really inspired leadership at those three unions that really, brought us together and changed to win or not, international politics or not. We were able to cut through it and just get the job done.
Yeah, all people who aren't going to see any benefit to it being increased other than it's good for society.
It's good for all of us, and we actually made the connection. We can make this good for all of us, and I think in the end that was internalized here. And our challenge now is to make it stick. Is to keep the wolves at bay, and we're ready. We got a plan for that too.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you taking time for us. I would love to have you back again as things continue down the road.
Anytime, Rick. By the way, my in-laws are from Pittsburgh, so I have a soft spot for the Keystone State, so I wish you guys well out there.
Thanks so much. Dave Frybroth, Executive Secretary, Treasurer of the King County Central Labor Council. We've got a link to his website at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Dave's name, take you right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta get organized. We gotta do it today. No more mindless confusion. No more disarray. We gotta get organized.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for The World in Two. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service. Heads of state and veterans from around the world gathered in France today to mark the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings. President Barack Obama spoke at a ceremony at the Normandy American Cemetery, the final resting place of some 9,387 soldiers.
Normandy, this was democracy's beachhead. And our victory in that war decided not just a century, but shaped the security and well-being of all posterity. We worked to turn old adversaries into new allies. We built new prosperity. We stood once more with the people of this continent through a long twilight struggle until finally a wall tumbled down and an iron curtain too. And from Western Europe to East, from South America to Southeast Asia, 70 years of democratic movements spread.
The president also used his remarks to praise the modern American military and the ways in which it's changed and stayed the same since 1944.
And as today's wars come to an end, this generation of servicemen and women will step out of uniform, and they too will build families and lives of their own. They too will become leaders in their communities, and commerce and industry and perhaps politics, the leaders we need for the beachheads of our time. And God willing, they too will grow old in the land they helped to keep free.
We'll have more world news for you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
So did Rand Paul let something out of the bag, telling the terrorists that were released that, look out, there may be a drone with your name on it? As I said from the beginning, don't be surprised if the five, the Fantastic Five, don't be surprised if they were well chipped. And I said from the beginning, I can't imagine that we wouldn't have sent them back bugged to high hilt to follow their movement. And the guy who filibustered for hours, if I remember right, it was like an entire day of filibustering over the use of drones, now saying, well, we might come after you with drones. Oh, very cute. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I've got Victoria Jones, Talk Radio News Service. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So drones, we're going to send drones after him, Victoria.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll get him with a drone.
Are you uncomfortable with this? And I've been saying all week. This whole Bergdahl thing has me very uncomfortable. All of the rhetoric around it. He's a traitor. He's a deserter. All of this stuff without actually having any idea of what may or may not have actually happened.
We know very little about what may or may not have happened. We know a little bit because Charlie Savage of the New York Times and another reporter got hold of the classified military report from 2009 and did a piece on it Thursday, I think it was. So we know a certain amount of what happened, and we know that he's wandered off from base, once in California and once in Afghanistan, a couple of times before, and come back.
So maybe he was just out for a nature walk.
Well, this is what was that one time he did go out to see either the sunrise or the sunset. Yes, he did. That was the reason.
So he wasn't going to be part of the Taliban? I mean, because I actually had a friend of mine who's a military guy, spent a couple of years in the military, who actually believes he's a deserter and he wanted to join. He bought into the whole thing. The father's growing the beard and all of this made-up stuff that you go, where'd you get this?
There is nothing in the military report at all about joining the Taliban. There is no evidence for this. These same squad mates who are now, without any evidence whatsoever, accusing him, first of all, of being a deserter, second of all, of being responsible for every death in his province in a 3-month period after he disappeared, and then third, they added to that he joined the Taliban. So they related the things that he's done, you notice, over this week. They don't have any evidence for this Taliban at all. None.
I mean, I look at this and I go, have we lost our freaking minds? I mean, really,
Yes.
I actually had someone who said we should have just left him there to die, and I'm going, or soldiers? Really? And yeah, he's a deserter, he's a traitor. And I'm going, again, we don't know that. I believe almost nothing that comes out of military intelligence. I believe almost nothing that they put out to us.
And why do we hand over deserters to the Taliban now? When did we make a deal with the Taliban that we hand over our deserters to them?
That's another good question. A lot of them, but you know, you listen to some of this stuff, and it's kooky. And I somebody sent me a Glenn Beck article where they were dissecting the rescue or the transfer or whatever, and they were going through step by step of how it was, you know, the worst thing in the history of military operations because they did it in a low spot where there were all kind of ambush potentials all around, and they didn't frisk him until they got him on the airplane, on the helicopter, and all of this insanity. And I'm going, you know, I think, you know, my grandfather, he never spoke about his time in the military. And anytime you heard anything military-wise on radio or on television, he would say they shouldn't be talking about that because he thought all that stuff should be classified. And he should. I think he would lose his freaking mind right now if he were alive.
I think all these guys over in Normandy their heads would explode if they had the opportunity to talk about what they think about most of this.
Because to me, all it looks like is it's all about just that O guy. It's him. If it were anybody else, other than the black guy in the White House, it would be fine. But it's him.
Yeah. You know, if Bush had brought him home, he'd be a hero.
It's just very nuts to me. Very, very nuts.
It's very, very strange. It's very, very strange.
So today, the 70th anniversary of D-Day, and a huge ceremony. I got to be honest, didn't get the artistic dancing thing.
Didn't get that. Didn't get it.
I kind of missed the point.
I know it's a European thing, not an English European thing, but it's a continental European thing.
And as I was, because I had a meeting early this morning, and I was stuck in a waiting room for about an hour, and I'm watching it on. I think it was MSNBC, and at one point they were saying they were going to start playing German music, and I'm going, really? Is this a day the Germans celebrate?
Actually, kind of, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they're glad that it came to an end, and yes, it's okay. Very interesting. They, I mean, not in the same way that we do, but they're not walking around tails between legs and sort of like, well, we lost, we wish we'd won. They don't feel that way. They don't wish they'd won.
Well, good. Yeah, I thought it was I just thought it was interesting.
It is. It is very interesting. It was very powerful. The speeches were very powerful. The fly past was powerful. There was many, many powerful moments today, really.
And the 93-year-old Jim Martin, I think his name was, who was, you know, there 70 years ago today, did he jump out of the plane today?
Well, one guy did. At least one guy did. There were a few of them who jumped out of planes. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, 93 years old, and I'm like, well, I mean, if you make it to 93, why not?
Why not do it? I mean, just break all your bones.
Yeah, I mean, you get a major case of ankle hippolytis, but still, you did it.
You did it. I mean, what have you got to lose?
You know what ankle hippolytis is, don't you?
No idea.
That's where the ankle is driven straight up into the hip.
Okay, then.
There you go. I don't know where I got that, but it came from somewhere. But an incredible day today, and the big sideline story is this is really the first time Obama and Putin kind of were near each other within talking distance, right?
Yeah, and they were. First of all, they avoided each other like divorced parents at a wedding. You know, at one point, President Obama was walking behind Putin and literally could have tapped him on the shoulder, and he's looking everywhere except at him and talking to everybody except him. And I mean, then they're standing close to each other, and they won't look at each other. And then after the lunch in the chateau, they started talking across the table, and then they had a 15-minute conversation, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing. You got to wonder what they talked about.
Well, what they talked about, we do know a certain amount of what they talked about because we have a readout from both sides. President Obama made clear to Putin that de-escalation depends upon Russia recognizing President-elect Poroshenko as the legitimate leader of Ukraine, ceasing support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, and stopping the provision of arms and material across the border, and that a failure to take these steps would further isolate Russia, and that if he takes these steps, then, well, good things can happen.
There you go. So during the Reagan years, they traded missiles for arms with the Iran-Contra folks. Are we going to trade missiles for chocolate?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. Because Poroshenko, he's the big chocolate guy there, right?
He's a chocolate king. He's made billions out of chocolate. Yeah. Poroshenko has a chocolate factory. Literally, he has a chocolate factory in Russia.
Nice. Well, hey, everyone needs chocolate, right? At least my wife says so.
I am in total accord with your wife.
She is very pro-chocolate.
As she should be.
Let's move back to home. Job numbers out today, 217,000 new jobs created. Good, bad, and different?
It's considered good. Healthy, if not spectacular, is how the New York Times characterized it. The pace of job creation, 217,000 positions. I mean, it wasn't, April was outsized. It was 282,000. That was totally unexpected. And everybody sort of went, whoa, where did that come from? Well, that was really a reaction to the crazy, awful numbers that we had after the bitterly cold and snowy winter. So this is good. These are good numbers. We've had 4 months in a row of healthy job growth now, and that's considered positive. We've also now gained back the numbers of jobs lost after the Great Recession.
Yay! And that only took us what? 5 years, 6 years, 6 years?
Long time.
And how large is the population grown to get back to that number?
Oh, you would ask that question. Well, it's 7% larger now.
Okay, there you go. What I did find interesting about the job numbers is only gained of those 217,000 jobs, only 10,000 of them, somewhere in the 10,000 range, were actually manufacturing jobs. So I keep going, well, what kind of jobs are we actually creating? Is it just more low-wage service sector jobs? I'll wash your car if you cut my dog's hair, and I'll cut your grass if you'll wash my windows?
It was a combination. Apparently the most robust hiring included professional and business services, leisure and hospitality, and education and healthcare. Healthcare was very strong. Healthcare employment rose 34,000 in May, double the typical monthly gain over the last 2 months. But so it was a mixture.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're getting older, we need more people to take care of us. And could it be because of healthcare.gov? The expansion money, and you started seeing some hiring in that? Is that possible?
It's possible. I can't say whether that is because I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's possible. I mean, I've noticed following these jobs numbers over the last year that with the ramping up of healthcare, that there just seems to have been an uptick in healthcare hiring.
I think that has something to do with it. I mean, we keep telling this governor here where we're at. Hopefully, we're only going to have him for a couple of more months until we send him back into South Carolina in November. But if you take the Medicaid expansion money, you could probably create about 40,000 jobs here in the state and bring insurance to folks who need it. It would be a good boom for the economy. He's not buying.
He's not. No.
Because I don't think he wants to get reelected. I think he wants to go down in history as the only governor in modern history not to win 2 terms.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very historic election, and I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a big fan of the lieutenant governor, and I said the good thing about him is his political career is now done. He has tied himself to a sinking ship, and hopefully he's tied the rope around his neck. But he's going to be a footnote in history. That is for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the thought, to be a footnote in history.
There you go. If you've got to be something, I don't know that I would want to be that. But no, and he's getting thumped at this point. The Democratic nominee is I guess like 25 points ahead at this point.
That's a thumping.
Well deserved in my view. And talking about healthcare.gov, I understand they're revamping things, doing things a little different, I guess.
Yeah, they've conceded that things might not have gone too well, and they are actually scrapping significant parts of the marketplace in an effort to avoid the problems that plagued the site's launch. So you see, of course, there's going to be another launch coming up later this year. And what they're going to do, they've got lots of things they're going to do.
Will we get chocolate?
They're not that innovative. There's going to be a new version of the healthcare.gov, a revamp of the site's consumer-facing portion, including the application for coverage most people will use, as well as a comparison tool that lets them shop for plans. They're also turning to cloud computing from Amazon.com web services unit to host many of their functions. They're also replacing software that people use to create accounts and log into healthcare.gov, because that was a huge problem. There's going to be a new screening tool that will direct households with complex situations like multiple families living in one house. That was a huge problem people had. So they'll be directed to a new streamlined application. There's going to be a new home page if you're a new consumer, visual tools and design to help them learn about the program, and window shop without registering, and find local assistance, and optimize for mobile devices and run on cloud computing. It all sounds great. Problem is, everything's running behind schedule and hasn't been tested properly.
Is that like deja vu?
Yeah, a little bit. But they do have a new chief at the helm, Sylvia Burwell.
Yay, her name's familiar. Where do I know her from?
She's the former director of the Office of Management and Budget, and she just got confirmed this week.
That's right. That's right. Well, good for her. I mean, I hope she does well. I hope this works finally. I'm not a huge fan of Obamacare. I'm hoping that eventually we move to single payer and get this private nonsense out of the way. But these are steps forward, I think, right?
It's a step in a different direction, and certainly more people have signed up for healthcare coverage than had it before it existed.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing, I don't think, not yet anyway. But those people with insurance, they'll want health. They want to go get health care. They just don't want insurance. See, like, I'm the dumb one. I'm the one who's sick, and I never go to the doctor. I've got to be dead before they take me to the doctor, or virtually dead.
That's because you're a man.
Yeah, well, and that's the problem. And I have probably I have the Cadillac healthcare plans. They tell me, and I just never use it. So this idea that if we give people health care that they're going to abuse it just seems kind of foreign to me.
Well, a lot of people don't abuse it, and then people like you should use your health plan.
For what? I have the flu. What are they going to do for me? They're going to pat me on the head, tell me go home, have chicken soup, and sleep it out.
No, there are things now that actually help with the flu.
Huh.
They've actually come a long way. There are things that you can take that help with the flu.
So the other night when I just went home and had a couple of shots of Crown Royal with a NyQuil mixer, that's probably not the best thing?
No, it's not the best thing. There are actually better things than that now, particularly if you take them at the beginning of the flu. And I'm not getting paid by the hour for this either.
Wow, I'll have to think about that next time. But here's the thing. I'm so stupid that I didn't realize I was at the beginning until I was actually in the middle.
No, well, that's one of the problems with getting things like flu. You often don't realize that that's what it is.
Yeah. And
that's
finally,
so nasty.
Finally, immigration reform on the horizon?
Well, Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, Republican from Virginia, sends out a memo, every month or so to House Republicans. I don't think Democrats get copied on it, saying, hey, this is our agenda for this month. This is what we're going to do. So he just sent it out today, and they're going to take up an extension of highway programs. It's actually rather controversial, tax credits and appropriations, things like that. There's no mention of an immigration bill on this thing at all. There is some mention of a Republican Obamacare replacement bill, but no mention of immigration. Now, they only have 2 months because they go on a long recess come the end of July.
So we can probably expect nothing then.
Well, it would be very difficult to get anything done if they're not going to do it in June. Then you can't get much done in 1 month in Washington, D.C. I mean, unless it's a scandal. You can do that in a month.
Well, although there's part of me that goes, maybe we shouldn't get anything done until after. I look here in Pennsylvania. There's an awful lot of ugliness going to happen in the next couple of days, and none of it good. I would like them just to gridlock till the end of the election cycle, because all of the stuff that they're talking about doing, all bad.
Well, you may get your wish. I mean, there's going to be a lot of gridlock until the end of the cycle. That's mostly what they're going to do.
Well, if they do anything, let it be that. As always, Victoria, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you so much.
Our good friend Victoria Jones, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Where working people come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
If it comes a hot August day and you have no air conditioning, you know who you can blame? The president.
Republicans attack new EPA emissions standards, but
our country must take action to address climate change.
They were for emissions cuts before they were against them. Good news for endangered wolves, plus Los Angeles oil spill reveals major flaw in pipeline oversight.
I refuse to believe there are any flaws in pipeline oversight. All of those flaws and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
It's the most significant effort any president has ever taken to combat global warming. Second place, of course, is a 43-way tie for nothing.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner said this the other day when asked about climate change.
Well, listen, I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change.
So he wasn't qualified to discuss it in 2014, but long ago, before the Citizens United case, John Boehner said,
the fact is that we have had climate change. Clearly, humans have something to do with it.
So way back when, Republicans were more than happy to recognize what everybody knows about science, but something changed since then, eh?
Yeah, I wonder what that could be, but we'll have more on that in a moment. First, as we reported earlier this week, the Environmental Protection Agency proposed the first ever standards to reduce carbon pollution from power plants, the nation's single largest source of the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming. Immediately, polluters and their friends in Congress launched a massive PR campaign to stop those new pollution standards. Here's Republican Senator Rand Paul of Coal State, Kentucky, on Fox News.
If it comes a really cold day in January and there's not enough heat, you know who you can blame. The Democrats tried to pass it and they didn't have enough votes, so now they're going to try to do this through executive edict. And I don't think that's legal.
Rand Paul either doesn't know or doesn't care that the new emission standards are required by law through the Clean Air Act, passed by a previous Congress, and through multiple Supreme Court decisions. President Obama used executive authority because Republicans in Congress have blocked all other pollution legislation, including the 2009 cap-and-trade bill, even though that bill was based on a Republican cap-and-trade proposal from the 2008 presidential campaign.
So to be clear here, the law requires the EPA to put these regulations in place. The EPA is part of the executive branch. Barack Obama is following the law in issuing these regulations as directed by the Supreme Court, and Rand Paul is furious about it, calls it illegal.
Yep, but they didn't always say that. Here's John McCain from 2008.
I've been to Greenland, I've been to the South Pole, I've been to the Arctic. I know it's real. I've been involved in this effort for many years, and we've got to act.
And here's Mike Huckabee.
I think we ought to have some cap and trade. And we ought to declare that we will be oil-free of energy consumption in this country within a decade.
And for good measure, here's Mitt Romney.
But you're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
Oh, and don't forget Sarah Palin.
I believe that man's activities certainly can be contributing to the issue of global warming, climate change.
So all of that was before 2010, before the Citizens United decision, before the Koch brothers and the oil companies was allowed to purchase the Republican Party lock, stock, and barrel.
Yep. And not to put too fine a point on it, but the EPA's new emission standards are actually less stringent than the plan put forward by candidate John McCain in 2008. In other news, remember that pipeline rupture in Los Angeles a few weeks ago?
I do.
It flooded an entire LA street knee-deep in crude oil.
It did.
InsideClimate.org reports that the LA pipeline rupture exposed an even bigger hole in pipeline oversight. Turns out the company that owns the pipeline, Phillips 66, told regulators the pipeline was dormant when they bought it, and they didn't even know it was full of oil because they were never required to verify that they inspected it or that it was emptied in compliance with regulations because they're not required to.
So they were actually not using this pipeline. It was full of oil, and they had no idea?
Yep.
Why would they buy a pipeline if they weren't going to use it?
They're planning on using it. They just weren't using it right now, and they didn't bother to verify that it had been emptied. Finally, remember the lone wolf, the lonely young male wolf in search of a mate that crossed over the border from Oregon into California several months ago?
I do not.
He became a media star because he crossed into California looking for a mate, but there are no wolves in California because they were eradicated decades ago.
Sad.
Well, some good news. That wolf is now confirmed to be raising a litter of pups back over the border in Oregon. The confirmation came on the same day as the California State Fish and Game Commission voted to elevate gray wolves in the state to endangered species status.
And once again, you end the week on a happy note. Smartly done, Desi Doyen. For much more on stories and the others we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Please consider a donation to help the Green News Report your public airwaves. Listen to us anytime for free via Stitcher, iTunes, or TuneIn. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Don't you know, we're talking about a revolution sounds. Don't you know?
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show. Progressive talk with a conscience.
While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know? Talking about a revolution sounds.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show.
Poor people gonna rise up, get their share.
Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Yeah, poor people going to rise up. At some point, I keep saying that's got to happen. And I look at what happened in Seattle, and you know, I think as David pointed out, it was a wide coalition of folks who came together and said, you know what, we can make things better. And I've been saying that for some time now, that you change your little corner of the world. Now, granted, in Washington State, the city of Seattle still is legally allowed to raise their own minimum wage. Not here in Pennsylvania, however. Here in the great state of Pennsylvania, much like electric deregulation, we have the freedom not to raise our minimum wage, thanks to the 2006 poison pill Republicans negotiated in. I mean, they were thinking down the road. They were thinking forward thinking, and you got to give the ALEC people and the billionaire class credit for foreseeing what they wanted down the road, which is consolidation of power at the state level, even though the Republicans are the ones who say, well, we believe in local control, except when it comes for, you guessed it, workers. Today, big news, I guess big news today. Evidently, not. I've always thought the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, all of them are trolling social media, Facebook, Twitter, the whole thing. Today's big news was that the CIA could neither confirm nor deny that they sent out their first tweet. The lack of content didn't dampen interest. In less than 90 minutes, the CIA account had nearly 84,000 followers, and the number was climbing quickly. In fact, I haven't. I'm deliberately not. I don't want to know. Maybe I should. Should I? You should let me know. You can tweet me at Rick Smith at Rick Smith Show, or you can email me rick@thericksmithshow.com. Interested in the thoughts. Where should I go? Big news in Wisconsin today. Like Pennsylvania just a couple of weeks ago, a federal judge in Wisconsin has ruled, well, the ban on same-sex marriage is, drum roll please, it is unconstitutional. That means that same-sex couples can indeed enjoy the benefits that we married folk, that we get to enjoy. Whatever that may be. And, there was part of me going, I'm not quite sure why you want it, but as long as you do, you have the absolute right to it under our Constitution, under our godless Constitution. It's not about religion. So good for them. I'm sure folks will clamor to it, and good for them. Hey, as I've said in the past, I'm all in favor of family units, whatever that is, because I do believe it does add stability. I think marriage is a stabilizing force. And if you have folks who are of same sex, I don't care. I'm confident enough that I'm willing to share the sanctity of marriage with everyone. I have no idea how it's going to affect my marriage. I think only I can screw that up, or my wife. I mean, one of us could probably screw it up if we had to. Hopefully we don't. I still am struggling to find out how two people outside of us could do that, but, it is what it is. So good for you folks there in Wisconsin. Hopefully at some point in the next, decade, this is no longer an issue that has to be brought up. It just is, and we move on with love. So there you go. Get your Christmas lists out. You're going to want to put this on your Christmas list for all you Schmuck Dynasty fans. Evidently, in October, the hucksters, and you got to give these guys credit. They are marketing geniuses. You got to wonder how much of the shtick is just shtick, and if any of it's real. But you got to give them credit. They have figured out how to market themselves. They sell belt buckles and Cajun seasonings and apps for their smartphones and lighters and guns. Yes, guns. You remember that whole stir up about the gays and they shouldn't be allowed to marry and got the old man on the news a lot? Just happened to coincide exactly with the release of the schmuck gun. Marketing geniuses. Well, they are now coming out with the Duck Commander Faith and Family Bible. That's right, the Duck Commander Faith and Family Bible. It is a King James translation of the Old and New Testaments that will include branded features about the family. You're going to get right in the good book story. You're going to get Phil and Al and their core 5 values of faith, family, fellowship, forgiveness, and freedom. It's all going to be right there. And there's going to be stuff in there about how they hate the gays. Yeah. There's got to be. It's got to be right there, right? They've got to highlight Leviticus. It's got to be done. It must be done. In fact, as it was reported, the Bible will include 30. Count them, 30 life-changing testimonials, along with 125, and they're throwing this in for free, 125 set your sights features. Not quite sure what the hell that is, but they're free. They're right there in the book. All you can do is to buy the book, and they come with it free. It's also going to outline. They're also going to outline the 52 Bible reading plans that they have. So they're now the new Messiah. You buy the book. There you go. Wow. And you know what? Somebody will buy it just because it's them. And it's not like they're going to read it. I mean, you know how many people have Bibles and none of them actually read them? Like Rick Santorum says, we like stories about them. Amazing. Anyway, thanks for being here. Always great to have you here at the program. If you missed any portion of it, thericksmithshow.com. We'll see you next time.
It's coming from the wind. You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime. SmithShow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like time flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.